Hi everyone, welcome to 1% Crime. I know you can't sleep, so I'll accompany you with crime stories that happened all over the world. Before we get to the story, tell me, where did you hear it from? And if you like this content, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let's jump straight into the story. The deaths of Diane and Alan Johnson shocked the peaceful community to its core. On September 2nd, 2003, the Blaine County Sheriff's Office received a distressing 911 call from Kim Richards. According to Kim, her neighbor's 16-year-old daughter, Sarah Johnson, had come running to her doors screaming that her parents, 52-year-old Diane and 46-year-old Alan Scott Johnson, had been murdered. Officers and first responders were dispatched to the scene immediately. When law enforcement officials arrived, they entered the house and found a gruesome scene before them. In the bed, they found Diane with a gunshot to her head. She appeared to have been killed while she slept. The walls and the ceiling near the headboard were splattered with blood, and a fragment of skull was on the floor. On the floor next to Diane's side of the bed was the body of her husband, Alan. He was clad only in a towel, and blood was pooling beneath him. At first glance, investigators believed it was an opening-shut case. It appeared to have been a case of murder-suicide, but as they looked closer at the crime scene, their opinion quickly changed. Investigators could hear the sound of water running, and followed the blood trail back to the en-suite bathroom. The shower was left on. When officers turned the water faucet off, they saw blood splatter and a distinct bullet hole on the shower wall. Investigators began searching the house for more clues. On the bedroom floor was what investigators believed was the murder weapon, a .264 caliber Winston rifle. At the foot of the bed in which Diane lay dead were 2 kitchen knives. Another knife was found on their son Matt's bed. The clues at the scene puzzled investigators. There was no sign of forced entry, as it was noted that the Johnsons didn't lock the doors, a fact that only those close to the family would know. The house hadn't been ransacked, as one would expect from a possible robbery gone wrong. Officers at the scene questioned Sarah as to what she remembered before she ran to her neighbor's house for help. She explained to investigators that she'd been asleep when she heard a gunshot. She ran to her parents' bedroom and called out for her mother, and that was when she heard a second gunshot. Without hesitation, Sarah ran to a neighbor's house for help. She didn't see the intruder. The statement was corroborated by the neighbor, who called 911, Kim Richards. On the property was a guest house which had been rented out to a close friend of Alan's, 45-year-old Mel Spiegel. Investigators entered the house and found a rather incriminating piece of evidence on the bed, the scope belonging to the same rifle found at the crime scene. However, Mel was nowhere to be found. His convenient disappearance had made him a possible person of interest for investigators. The entire property was sealed off on the orders of lead investigator, Sergeant Walt Femling. He also told officers to stop the waste disposal truck from removing any trash cans from the property. The theory was that Mel may have had an altercation with Alan and Diane and killed them in the heat of the moment. As they worked through this theory, Renchick's team searched through the trash cans and discovered even more evidence. Inside, they found a pink bathrobe that had been bundled up. Once crime scene technicians opened the bathrobe, they found a latex glove, a single brown leather glove that matched the one found in the Johnsons' bedroom, and ammunition for a .25 caliber gun. All the evidence was tied and sent off for DNA testing while investigators developed their own scenario. It was now becoming clear to investigators that whomever killed the couple knew about the unlocked doors and the day the trash was removed. It was possible the killer threw the evidence in the trash before fleeing the scene. It was time to call in Mel Spiegel. Hours after the double homicide, sheriff's deputies received news that Mel Spiegel had been found in Boise, Idaho. Mel agreed to speak with investigators and met them at the police station in Boise. Investigators asked Mel about his whereabouts that morning. Mel said he spent the weekend with his family and was planning to return to Bellevue in a week. Investigators contacted Mel's family members, who confirmed his alibi. Mel was asked about his relationship with Alan and Diane. He told officers that he'd been renting the guest house from the couple for years, and he showed a very good and close relationship with them. When asked about the rifle used in the murders, Mel admitted that it did belong to him. However, he said it had been locked away in his closet before he left for Boise over the weekend. Investigators then asked Mel about anyone he believed that may have made enemies with the Mel revealed that Alan and Diane were starting to grow worried about their daughter, Sarah. She'd started dating a 19-year-old boy named Bruno Santos. From what Mel had heard, Bruno was living in the country illegally and selling drugs to make a living. It was a bit of a stretch for investigators, but now urged them to speak to other family members. Investigators did just that and started to put together a picture of the Johnson family. Alan and Diane met in the early 1980s. Diane had been in a relationship before meeting Alan and had a toddler son named Matt. The pair married in 1983 and Alan adopted Matt as his own son. They moved into a beautiful home in the quiet city of Bellevue, Idaho, and in making 87, welcomed their daughter Sarah Marie Johnson into the world on January 25, 1987. Alan was the co-owner of a landscaping firm in Bellevue, and Diane worked as a tax collector. Together, they'd made a beautiful home for their 2 children and were, by all accounts, a loving family. The couple were also well known in their community as Alan was an avid trap shooter, a common pastime for many in the community. In 2003, their family life had seemed harmonious to outsiders. Matt, who was 22 years old at the time, was away studying at the University of Idaho in Moscow, Idaho. Sarah had also been doing well at school and was part of her school's volleyball team. She was also the apple of Alan's eye. But investigators were about to uncover the family tensions that had started arising in the previous few months. Having cleared Mail as a possible suspect, investigators took his advice and returned to Bellevue to speak with family members. As expected, everyone knew the Johnsons to be a happy and loving family. Investigators interviewed their son Matt, who had returned from the university, as well as Diane's sister and brother-in-law, Linda and Jim Faveld. All 3 said that the family life appeared to be happy and normal. That was until Sarah met Bruno Santos. Matt, Linda, and Jim all agreed that Sarah dating Bruno had become a major point of contention in the family. Over the few months leading up to the murder, tensions had gotten worse within the household. But being a teenager, Sarah naturally rebelled against her parents' rules. Even when her parents forbid Sarah from seeing Bruno again, she continued to defy them. However, Jim revealed information to the investigators that could possibly have given Bruno a reason to murder Diane and Alan. Days before the murders, Alan and Diane had discovered that Sarah had been lying about spending the night at a female friend's house. Sarah had spent the night with Bruno instead. Alan called Jim and told him what happened. Alan then asked Jim to come with him to confront Bruno. Jim told investigators that Alan was furious and threatened to report Bruno to police for assaulting Sarah as she was underage. The 2 men then left with Sarah. A charge of such a serious nature could spell deportation for Bruno. After listening to what Jim had revealed, investigators believed that this was motive enough for Bruno to eliminate the Johnsons. It was time to speak to Bruno Santos. County police were familiar with Bruno Santos. He was a high school dropout and had been involved in a few minor drug-related crimes. When he was taken in for questioning, he became confrontational with investigators. During his interview, he was arrogant and hard to deal with according to investigators. He then told investigators that he proposed to Sarah and that she'd accept it. Investigators believed that he'd said this to prove that he loved Sarah and wouldn't have done anything to jeopardize their relationship. When investigators asked him about his whereabouts on the morning of the murders, Bruno said that he was asleep on the couch at his home. He told officers to contact his mother, who confirmed that she'd been at home with him. For investigators, this was still not a strong alibi. When investigators asked Bruno about Alan and Diane, his attitude towards the Johnsons was obvious. He wasn't a fan of the couple. Back at the Johnsons' house, forensic teams were collecting evidence from the entire home. They'd used a UV light to comb through every part of the house for possible blood evidence that could indicate an escape route taken by the killer. While searching Sarah's room, they found blood splatter and bone fragments on a wall in Sarah's room. This discovery only added to the mystery of the shooting. The blood and bone were sent to the lab for testing. This discovery had investigators questioning if Sarah was being honest about what she really saw that morning. The search of the room led investigators to even more evidence. A single brown leather glove, the same one that was found bundled up in the trash. A key to the guest house and unspent .264 caliber shells were also found in Sarah's room. On one of the unspent shells was tissue matter possibly transferred from the glove when the killer tried to hide evidence. This too was sent to forensics for testing. Investigators now believe that Bruno may have killed Sarah's parents and went to her to help get rid of the evidence. Investigators served Bruno and his mother with a search warrant to collect evidence from the house. All the clothes he wore that day, including his shoes, were taken for testing. His fingerprints were also taken to test against any found at the crime scene. Bruno was taken to the hospital where a DNA sample was taken for testing. Hair clippings and hand scrapings were also collected for evidence. Bruno was announced as the prime suspect in the murders of Alan and Diane Johnson. However, investigators were about to receive information that was going to take the investigation in a completely unexpected direction. Having thoroughly tested the clothes and shoes taken from Bruno, forensic experts couldn't find any trace of blood belonging to either Diane or Alan. At the actual crime scene, there were no traces of DNA, hairs, or fingerprints found anywhere near the bodies of Alan or Diane, nor was there any physical evidence that placed Bruno in the couple's room. The test done on the gloves and bathrobe also came back with a negative result. Investigators were stumped. They were sure that Bruno had the most reason to kill both Alan and Diane. However, the complete lack of physical evidence that should have placed Bruno at the scene suggested he was telling them the truth. Bruno was eventually eliminated as a suspect in the case. As they looked at the case closely, their minds started to shift to someone else. Investigators began questioning Sarah's family and friends more intentionally about her home and personal life. They'd come to discover that Sarah had been prescribed antidepressants and that her relationship with her parents was rocky at best. Family members said that they brushed off her behaviors being normal for a teenager. Sarah, they believed, was at the age when most children start to become rebellious and push against their parents' authority. But Linda, Sarah's aunt, started to grow suspicious with her niece's behavior. She told investigators that Sarah was not going through the normal grieving process. Linda said that Sarah showed more interest in returning to school and her friends than taking time to deal with the loss of both of her parents. Investigators then turned to some of Sarah's friends and asked them about her behavior since the death of her parents. They all agreed that Sarah was acting indifferent to the murders. They also told investigators that she seemed more interested in getting her nails painted. The one thing that stood out for them, though, was Sarah being more concerned for Bruno since his arrest. It was odd to them that Sarah was concerned rather than angry with her parents' alleged killer. Investigators didn't want to believe where their thoughts were taking them, as it was too horrible to imagine. But they had no choice except to look into Sarah as a possible suspect. The Johnsons' home was still an active crime scene, and now investigators were treating Sarah's room as a second area of interest. Investigators at the scene were now questioning how the blood splatter had reached that far. A gun expert was called to the house to take a closer look at the spatter pattern. After analyzing the direction from Alan and Diane's room to Sarah's, the gun expert concluded that both bedroom doors were open at the time of the shooting. Investigators had also called plumbers to the scene after clogging was reported in one of the bathroom toilets. The source of the clog appeared to be a shower cap. Investigators decided to interview Linda, Matt, and Mel Spiegel regarding some of the evidence they discovered. Matt and Linda both identified the pink bathrobe as belonging to Sarah. Mel confirmed that Sarah had a key to the guest house and often helped him clean up the place. He also told investigators that Sarah was aware of the gun that was kept in the closet. Investigators now needed to be able to link Sarah to all the evidence, but that was going to prove difficult as eyewitnesses on the morning of the murders said that Sarah didn't have any traces of blood on her when she ran to a neighbor's house begging for help. This was also confirmed by forensics experts who used a luminol to test for any blood splatter on Sarah's clothes and found nothing at all. Investigators issued a warrant to confiscate and test the clothes Sarah had been wearing in the morning. Meanwhile, investigators wanted to speak to Sarah again and see if her story had changed since they last spoke to her. Investigators once again called Sarah in for an interview. She'd been staying with her aunt and uncle. Small inconsistencies were noted in Sarah's story. Overall, investigators found that her story had changed at least 5 different times. In some explanations, she said she was asleep and woke up to the sound of a gunshot. In another, she said she'd been awake when she heard the first gunshot. Another time, she told investigators that she was still in her room when she heard the second gunshot, but once again changed her story and said she was outside her parents' bedroom when the second shot was fired. Sarah also had a hard time to remember if her parents' room door was open or closed at the time of the shooting. Investigators remained calm when questioning Sarah to avoid her picking up on their suspicions. They'd already been made aware that both bedroom doors were open, and that was the only explanation for the blood splatter on Sarah's bedroom wall. Sarah was asked to submit a DNA sample, hair samples, and hand scrapings as part of the investigation to clear her name. These were all sent for testing to the lab. The pajama top and bottom that Sarah was using on the morning of the murders were sent to the lab to be tested by forensic specialist Rod Englert. Under a high-powered microscope, Englert found no traces of blood on the front of the robe. However, on the back of the garment, he found patterns of high-velocity blood splatter. He also found blue cotton fibers and green specks of paint on the inside of the robe that matched the shirt worn by Sarah that morning. But the smoking gun moment was yet to come. Lab results had also confirmed that Sarah's DNA was found on the inner lining of the latex glove and gun residue on both pairs of the brown leather glove. The blood found on the gloves and robe belonged to both Alan and Diane. This was more than enough for investigators to arrest and charge Sarah with the double homicide of Alan and Diane Johnson. On October 29, 2003, Sarah Johnson was arrested for the murders of her parents, Helen and Diane Johnson. She was held without bail at the Blaine County Jail awaiting trial. The story of a teenage girl murdering her parents made headlines nationally and became a media sensation. Investigators and prosecutors had to develop a plausible argument that showed Sarah was motivated and capable of committing such a heinous crime. Relying on statements from family members and friends of both Sarah and her parents, they started to put together a twisted tale of a teenager in the throes of passion. Since Sarah had started dating Bruno, her parents had disapproved of their relationship. As a result, Sarah started to sneak around behind her parents' backs and acted out as any normal teenager would. However, the trigger for Sarah happened a few days before the murders. She'd lied to her parents about staying with a friend when, in fact, she was staying with Bruno. Her father's threats to have Bruno charged with assault and deported to Mexico pushed Sarah over the edge. Investigators and prosecutors believed that this was the moment Sarah had concocted to get rid of her parents and live a happy life with Bruno. Being a fan of true crime and murder mysteries, Sarah believed that she had the perfect plot in place. On the morning of the murders, she got up and went to the guest house to retrieve the rifle. She then put on latex gloves, leather gloves, a shower cap to avoid blood splatter on her hair, and her bathrobe backwards to avoid any blood touching her clothes. Sarah then went to her parents' room when she heard her father get into the shower. She shot Diane in the head while she slept. Sarah then heard her father Alan call out and opened the bathroom door and shot him in the chest. After committing the murders, she placed knives in the bedrooms to stage the scene as if an intruder killed her pants. She then bundled up the evidence and threw it away in the trash, knowing the waste disposal company would pick up the evidence before investigators could find it. However, that didn't go to plan. Added to that, she didn't take into account the evidence that would be found in her room and the shower cap that had gotten lodged in the plumbing system. The evidence against Sarah was glaring, and it was time to go to trial. In February 2005, 2 years after her parents' murders, her defense team argued that Sarah was innocent and that her parents were murdered by an intruder. The prosecution, though, were ready with their argument. They presented the court with the physical evidence found at the crime scene and testimonies from family and friends that showed Sarah's behavior was strange since her parents were both killed. Most damning of all was the testimony of Bruno Santos, who not only wanted to clear himself of the murder at the trial, but provided the jury with evidence of Sarah's state of mind before the murders. Bruno testified that he and Sarah had agreed to get married, and Sarah had even told them that they could live in a big, beautiful house and be happy with just each other. Bruno also told the court that Sarah always spoke about how much she hated her dad and talked about shooting him. After 5 weeks of testimonies, proof of evidence, and crime scene explanations, the jury had come to a decision on March 16, 2005. Sarah, aged 18, was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without parole to the Pocatello Women's Correctional Center in Idaho. Sarah has since made several appeals to have her life sentence reduced. However, all her appeals have been denied, and she still remains in custody. Following Sarah's sentencing, the remaining family members have spoken out publicly about their feelings towards Sarah and her actions. The deaths of Alan and Diane have devastated their family entirely. The majority feel that Sarah was at fault and deserve the punishment she received. Sarah's brother, Matt, believed that Sarah showed no remorse for murdering their parents. He said that if she were ever given a second chance, she'd do a better job with the murders to avoid being caught. Pat Dishman, Diane's mother, spoke to Sarah during her sentencing hearing. She told her granddaughter that they still loved her, but that her actions had devastated their entire family. Alan's sister, Lynn Morell, said that Sarah was spoiled and rotten and was capable of murdering another person if she was ever released. She asked the judge to consider never releasing her from prison. Today's case was one of a truly twisted and disturbing nature. To be capable of murdering one's own parents proved that Sarah Johnson only thought about herself and not of the devastation she caused for her brother and family. While they're left behind to pick up the pieces, Sarah remains behind bars for her senseless crime. The case of Kristen Rossum. She could have been a scientist, but she chose a different path. Blonde Kristen Rossum, a chemistry graduate from San Diego State University, could have had a brilliant future. Instead, she is serving a life sentence in the Central California Women's Facility for the crime against her husband. Ralph and Constance Rossum had 3 children and were preparing them for an undoubtedly bright future. The children received education from top schools, were tutored, and participated in clubs and sections for talent development. However, the fragile and impulsive Kristen broke, unable to keep up with the pace and pursuit of the ideal. Lying, skipping classes, and the desire to escape reality first introduced her to a sense of ease and oblivion after consuming alcohol. But soon, alcohol stopped providing the desired effect of tranquility, and she became dependent on the controlled substance methamphetamine. Methamphetamine, meth, is the most addictive illicit substance in the USA. It causes paranoia, clouds judgment, euphoria, and hallucinations. Kristen's erratic behavior and detachment from real life caught her parents' attention. After a long conversation, she admitted that she had been addicted to the substance since high school. This behavior was a severe blow for a family of university-educated professionals. After several months of numerous conflicts with her parents, 17-year-old Kristen secretly ran away to Mexico with friends for a holiday. There, she met a man by chance. Tall, handsome Gregory de Villers, 7 years her senior, seemed like an angel who would save her. And he did. Greg fell in love with the bad girl. He took on the role of a parent and responsibility for her well-being. With Greg's support, she managed to get a job at a local forensic department as a toxicology assistant. Her skills impressed the employer. Her addiction was forgotten, which worked in her favor, as her job in toxicology provided access to seized controlled substances. As a forensic assistant, Kristen graduated from university with honors. Her teachers and employer praised her, handing her the Best Student Award, unaware of the reasons for her love of the chosen profession. Her relationship with Greg lasted about 5 years and ended with a grand wedding on June 5, 1999. Kristen's parents adored Greg and were at ease for their daughter, as she had climbed out of the pit of dependency and confidently stood on the road to a promising and happy life. In March 2000, Kristen was hired by the San Diego County Medical Examiner's Office as a toxicologist. A toxicologist analyzes body fluids to detect controlled substances. Gregory was working in the biotechnology industry at the time. Kristen quickly grew bored with her monotonous life and began seeking excitement elsewhere. She found an opportunity with a new colleague, Michael Robertson, who had been appointed as the department head. He was married, but that didn't stop a sudden infatuation between them. They couldn't keep their relationship secret for long. Greg found numerous letters exchanged between the secret lovers. The marital relationship deteriorated, but Gregory still hoped to save the marriage, knowing his wife's weaknesses and trying as hard as ever to save her. This time, Kristen didn't want to be saved. She demanded a divorce. On the morning of Monday, November 6, 2000, Kristen was getting ready for work as usual. Greg was ill and stayed home. Kristen was very worried about her husband. In the days following their separation talk, he had been lethargic and unusually calm. She informed his workplace of her husband's illness. She also visited him during her lunch break. Greg was asleep. At 9:22 p.m. that same day, Kristen called emergency services to report that her husband Greg was not breathing. He had most likely committed suicide because he was home alone. The woman cried into the phone and did not listen to the dispatcher's instructions to examine the body and possibly administer first aid. Police officers and paramedics arriving on the scene at 10:19 p.m. pronounced Gregory de Villers dead. He was lying on the bedroom floor with his torso exposed, surrounded by scattered rose petals. The room examination suggested that Greg most likely consumed a lethal dose of several controlled substances. Empty vials of powerful painkillers were scattered around, and torn wedding photos were found on his bed. During the interrogation, Kristen stated that she had informed her husband of their separation the previous evening. Just 17 months after the wedding, she regretted getting married. She felt she had rushed into it. Greg was too clingy, and she wanted to distance herself. Greg's death was ruled a suicide. The cause of death was strong, sedative drugs. Kristen signed the cremation papers. However, Gregory's family and friends refused to believe in such a sudden suicide. None of them noticed any changes in his character or mood. He had not shared his marital problems with anyone. Greg was so opposed to controlled substances that he would never have taken them. Soon, the relatives managed to stop the cremation and insisted on an independent autopsy. The family's persistence allowed for the consideration of a homicide scenario. Soon, toxicological tests revealed that Gregory's body contained an extremely high amount of feminine, a pain reliever 150 times stronger than morphine, along with lesser amounts of clonazepam and trace amounts of oxycodone, known as hillbilly heroin. Investigators speculated that, under the strong influence of clonazepam and other detected drugs, someone else administered the dose of fentanyl to Gregory. Kristen became the prime suspect, as fentanyl is not an over-the-counter medication, and she had ample knowledge and access to such drugs. Upon arrival for interrogation at the police station, Kristen's emaciated, unattractive appearance and her doping behavior indicated her drug dependency. This was confirmed by her own statements on the day of Gregory's death. Kristen was inconsistent in her accounts. Initially, Kristen told paramedics that Gregory had not taken any medication, but later she changed her statement, suggesting he might have taken oxycodone. At the hospital, Kristen told a nurse that Gregory might have overdosed on oxycodone. Oxycodone is similar in effect to codeine-based drugs. It can not only relieve pain, but also induce a sense of euphoria. It depresses the respiratory center, and without timely assistance, its use can be fatal. The police considered the possibility that Gregory died from an accidental overdose of cold medicine and oxycodone. In conversations with Kristen, they also learned that Gregory was very upset about their failing marriage, leading Kristen to tell the police that he ended his own life. This was another investigative avenue they explored. On November 8th, a colleague of Kristen's, Russ Lowe, called the police. He informed them about Kristen's affair with her boss. This information shifted the course of the police investigation. Evidence of Kristen's connection with her boss, Dr. Robertson, was found. The evidence included passionate emails they exchanged, as well as computer files and professional articles revealing Dr. Robertson's specialized knowledge of fentanyl. The criminal puzzle was coming together perfectly. It was suspected that Gregory became a threat to the lovers, as he knew that Kristen, with her access to the lab and controlled substances, was secretly using them, and Michael was covering for her. It was a premeditated crime. The challenge for the investigators was to prove it. During interrogation, Michael Robertson told detectives that he was aware of his lover's drug dependency. At that time, no charges were brought against the couple. They were both dismissed from their jobs for violating several rules during the investigation. Serious trouble for Kristen began in January, when police raided her home, finding traces of drugs and paraphernalia. She was arrested for the first time, but was later released on bail. The investigation progressed as new information emerged. This included Kristen's diary. During its initial examination, investigators hypothesized that it was written by Kristen not for herself, but for an external reader, as a means of covering up and affirming her innocence while crafting the appearance of Gregory's perfect self-inflicted demise. On the day of her husband's death, she bought a rose in revealing lingerie actions inconsistent with her distressed demeanor. Medical examination indicated that Gregory was unconscious for at least 6 hours before his passing, and his death could have occurred an hour or an hour and a half before it was confirmed. Additionally, a bruise around a needle injection site on the young man's arm was found, its purpose and executor unexplained. At Kristen's workplace, a shortage of the drug that led to Gregory's demise, as well as other controlled substances, was discovered. Police believed Kristen poisoned Gregory, administering fentanyl without his knowledge. The prosecution built its case on toxicological and medical data. With enough circumstantial evidence, Kristen was arrested on June 25, 2001, and charged with first-degree murder. After spending 6 months in custody, she was released on bail. The first trial soon commenced. The prosecution's main theory was the motive for the homicide. They argued that she terminated Gregory because he threatened to tarnish her good girl reputation by revealing her renewed drug use and affair with Michael Robertson. The prosecution claimed Kristen poisoned Gregory with fentanyl. The court heard that fentanyl is a powerful synthetic opioid, 80 times stronger than morphine. It was suggested that she first tried to end his life with clonazepam, but when that failed, she administered fentanyl. They also argued that she then staged the bedroom to look like Gregory ended his own life, tearing pages from her diary and placing rose petals and a wedding photo around his body. The court heard that Kristen, with a degree in biochemistry, used her knowledge of drugs and chemistry to terminate Gregory. The prosecution also claimed that Kristen hoped to convince her colleagues in the medical examiner's office that Gregory's death was self-inflicted, hiding information about the fentanyl. However, before Gregory's autopsy could be conducted, she was transferred to another lab, and the attempt to substitute toxicological research was unsuccessful. The prosecution presented Kristen's day on November 6th. Early in the morning, she called Gregory's employer to report his absence, then went to work. Her colleagues testified that about an hour after she arrived at work, around 9 a.m., she was seen crying in Michael's office. The apartment building manager where Kristen and Gregory lived reported seeing her return home at 12:10 p.m. At 12:41 p.m., she went to a local grocery store and purchased several items, including a single red rose. Credit card statements confirm this fact. Hours before Gregory's demise, she made multiple calls to Michael. Dr. Brian Blackburn, the San Diego County medical examiner who conducted Gregory's autopsy, testified that Gregory had been deceased for at least an hour before the paramedics arrived. He informed the court that Gregory developed early bronchopneumonia. This condition arises when secretions, normally expelled through breathing, accumulate in the lungs because a person is either unconscious or not breathing deeply enough. Dr. Blackburn also informed the court that Gregory's bladder contained a significant amount of urine, which would have been very uncomfortable had he been conscious. This led Dr. Blackburn to conclude that Gregory was breathing poorly for approximately 6 to 12 hours before his death. A person in an unconscious state would not be able to sprinkle rose petals over themselves. Dr. Blackburn showed that the level of clonazepam found in Gregory's blood was not at an overdose level and was not lethal. Dr. Theodore Stanley testified on behalf of the prosecution. He demonstrated that fentanyl is a potent and fast-acting pain reliever with a serious side effect that can lead to a person's respiratory arrest. Dr. Stanley stated that the speed at which fentanyl begins to act depends on the method of its administration. The peak effect occurs about 16 hours after applying a transdermal patch, 20 to 30 minutes after oral ingestion, 15 to 20 minutes after intramuscular injection, and within 5 minutes after intravenous injection. Dr. Stanley informed the court that fentanyl is usually not administered orally because the liver destroys about 65% of it, so only 35% enters the bloodstream. When asked to explain how fentanyl entered Gregory's system, neither Dr. Blackburn nor Dr. Stanley could provide a definitive opinion. Dr. Stanley showed that various concentration levels in Gregory's body, along with data indicating that Gregory was unconscious and breathing shallowly for several hours before his death, suggest that fentanyl was likely administered to Gregory multiple times. The prosecution could not confidently tell the jury how Kristen poisoned Gregory, but there were indications that she might have applied fentanyl patches to his arm while he was asleep. The disappearance of 15 patches from the laboratory where Kristen formerly worked supported this theory as a possibility. The defense asserted Kristen's innocence, acknowledging that fentanyl was the cause of Gregory's death, but claimed he self-administered it, intentionally causing his own demise due to despair over family issues. Kristen testified in court, describing waking up on the morning of November 6th to find Gregory distraught. She called his employer at 7:42 a.m. to report his illness, and that he wouldn't be coming to work. She told the court she went to work but returned to the apartment to check on Gregory, having lunch with him after noon. Kristen's testimony, I asked Gregory why he was so upset that morning. He replied that he wasn't feeling well and had taken some oxycodone and clonazepam. He planned to stay home and sleep. I left for work. Around 2:30 in the afternoon during my lunch break, I came home to check on Gregory. We had lunch. I then went back to work. I got home around 8 o'clock in the evening. Gregory was lying on the bed. I thought he was asleep. I took a bath. When I came out, I tried to wake him up. He was cold. I called the emergency services. The prosecutor cross-examined Kristen, calling her explanation strange. She admitted to lying in the past and about her drug use. He told the court that fentanyl was the perfect poison because it's hard to detect, which she knew well from her job. Medical testimony based on autopsy and toxicological findings proved that Gregory was unconscious for about 6-8 hours, meaning Kristen couldn't have had lunch with her husband that day. The defense claimed that although Dr. Blackburn showed the clonazepam level in Gregory's blood wasn't lethal, taking oxycodone, an opioid, and clonazepam, a benzodiazepine, together could create a synergistic effect, making them more potent. They suggested Gregory might have unknowingly taken the drugs himself. How fentanyl was administered and why high levels were found in his system remained unexplained. After 8 hours of deliberation, the jury found Kristen guilty of first-degree homicide and special circumstances homicide due to the use of poison. She was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Kristen maintained her innocence and appealed the verdict. The appellate court heard that errors were made by her own defense team. Her lawyers admitted fentanyl caused the death, but failed to test autopsy samples for fentanyl metabolites. This test could have determined whether Gregory swallowed fentanyl, or if the fentanyl found in the samples was a result of laboratory contamination after his death. If fentanyl had been detected only in the samples and never in Gregory's body, the prosecution's theory that fentanyl caused his death would have been incorrect. The appellate court heard that there was a break in the chain of custody regarding the samples. They were placed in a cardboard box, with each container marked as a sample from Gregory's body, but the containers weren't sealed. They were supposed to be delivered to the sheriff's office for immediate transfer to an external lab, but the person supposed to receive the samples was absent, so the box remained at the examiner's office for about 36 hours before being delivered to the sheriff's forensic lab. The appellate court's argument was that anyone with a key to the medical examiner's office building had access to the samples. Fentanyl could have been added to the samples posthumously. Kristen believed there was a motive to tamper with the samples and frame her for the crime due to various personal relationships and tensions among the staff. Indeed, Kristen argued in the appellate court that on November 8, 2000, Michael informed one of the toxicologists that he had examined a sample of Gregory's stomach contents. The three-judge panel of the 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals concluded that Kristen's lawyers erred in not contesting the prosecution's claim that her husband died from a fentanyl overdose. They stated that her legal team should have tested the autopsy samples for fentanyl metabolites rather than just admitting he died in such a manner. However, they did not overturn the verdict, but sent the case back to federal court to determine if this defense error could have altered the trial's outcome. After this decision, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that federal courts must adhere to the state court's decision when considering such appeals. Based on this ruling, the appellate court voted against holding a hearing on Kristen's case. Her appeal was denied, and she remains in custody. Michael Robertson was implicated as an accomplice in Kristen's trial. Authorities discreetly filed a criminal conspiracy complaint and issued a sealed warrant for the arrest of Michael Robertson, the former boss and lover of convicted perpetrator Kristen Rossum. Robertson, who lives freely and works as a forensic toxicology consultant in Australia since Rossum's husband's demise in 2000, could be arrested and held on $100,000 bail if he ever returns to the United States. Gregory's family filed a lawsuit accusing the county of negligence that allowed Kristen to steal a lethal dose of drugs from the medical examiner's office undetected. In 2006, a U.S. court awarded them $147 million in civil damages. In a case that continues to captivate the nation, Rossum, a former toxicologist at the medical examiner's office, was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole in February 2003 for stealing drugs from the lab and using them to poison her husband, Gregory DeVillers, staging a suicide scene in their apartment, scattering his body with red rose petals. This here story is about 26-year-old Elle Edwards. On Christmas Eve 2022, she was celebrating with her friends in a pub in Alley Village, Liverpool, UK. The gal was real vibrant and beautiful. She worked as a cosmetologist in a local beauty salon and was also an assistant to a dermatologist. Elle was naturally positive and mighty kind, which allowed her to win over even the most demanding clients. Elle was pretty and had become an excellent specialist in her fields. The gal was cheerful and always smiling, but at the same time, she remained determined, constantly moving towards her goals and dreams. On December 24th, G22, her sister Lucy flew in from Dubai to spend the holidays with the family, and Elle eagerly awaited her return. They decided to celebrate this long-awaited event in style, so the girls and their friends headed to the local pub. Here they had a great time, laughing a lot, dancing, and singing karaoke. In the merry atmosphere, no one noticed that a person to whom kindness was alien was nearby. Around 11:50 p.m., an emergency call came in. As they were exiling the pub, no less than 12 shots were fired and 2 of them hit Elle. She suffered a gunshot wound to the head that proved to be mighty serious. The dispatcher directed emergency services to the scene. They urgently arrived at the pub, loaded the gal into an ambulance, and took her to the local hospital. However, she died on the way as her injuries were incompatible with life. When the police informed the victim's family about the tragedy, they were in a state of shock. No one believed it, and no one understood how this could have happened to Elle. No one suspected that this beautiful and cheerful gal could have had deadly enemies. In the early stages of the investigation, the detectives had no leads. The asylum had attacked unexpectedly and disappeared just as mysteriously, leaving only a shell cast in and the bleeding victim at the crime scene. The attack was sudden but well planned and gave Elle no chance of survival. But was the gal the true target of the attack, or did she become a random victim of a madman? An unknown car stopped near the pub entrance, and minutes later the shooting started. In addition to the deceased, 4 other men received gunshot wounds of varying severity, all of them young people aged 22 to 33, who were spending the evening in the establishment and lived in the nearby towns. Initially, the police were inclined to believe that the murdered woman was a random victim. It was known that criminal gangs were operating in the area periodically. The shooting was likely to routine showdown between their members. However, all of this was just conjecture, which would have to be proven or disproved in the course of the investigation. So the detectives delved deeper into the victim's personality. Like the witnesses to the crime, the victim's relatives were at a loss as to who could have wanted Elle's death, as the girl seemed to have no ill wishes or enemies capable of such horrors. The detectives decided to interview other witnesses and the victims of the unknown criminal's gunfire. In addition, law enforcement officers requested the pub owner's video surveillance recordings. It would be necessary to talk to dozens of people and analyze several hours of video recordings. Several police officers were working on the extensive investigation. It was necessary to answer several difficult questions. There were too many victims of the attack. But was this spontaneous aggression? Or did the perpetrator pursue a specific target? All witnesses to the incident were interrogated. However, checking mobile communications data took more time. The media were notified to assist in the investigation. Law enforcement officers urged anyone with valuable information to come to the police station. First and foremost, this concerned possible video recordings made by random eyewitnesses, on any of which the car in which the aggressor arrived might appear. After the crime, the police held a meeting with local residents. The purpose of this communication was to persuade people possessing valuable information to share it with law enforcement officers. It was assumed that someone might have seen the moment of the attack or know the criminal. People were urged not to be afraid of the criminals and the local feuding clans. Community leaders supported local residents during this difficult time. In addition to the conversations, activists went door to door and communicated with the neighbors. Special trained officers worked with the family of the deceased, their goal being to provide them with support in connection with the heavy loss. In the course of this work, it was established that the perpetrator had left the pub parking lot in a dark-colored car. Eyewitness accounts regarding it may differed. It was dark and it was difficult to make out anything, but the most likely was a class. Later, this was confirmed after checking the outdoor surveillance cameras. The killer did not immediately open fire, but drive up to the parking lot and observe the pub visitors for some time. He sat in the car so that he could freely see the entrance and most of what was happening inside. Apparently, he was choosing the most convenient moment for the attack. After a few minutes of surveillance, when Elle came out, the criminal quickly got out of the car, fired 12 shots, then instantly got back behind the wheel and disappeared. Investigators, after studying the recordings, made an important conclusion. The attacker was alive. No one helped him. It was not possible to trace the exact location where the perpetrator fled. Therefore, the detectives went door to door to all local residents, describing the car and recounting the circumstances of the incident, trying to establish the identity of the killer. Patrolling the streets was carried out around the clock, and this yielded results. Just 2 days after the shooting, detectives detained 2 suspects, but no names were mentioned until all the circumstances were clarified. However, it was not possible to prove their involvement in the crime, in particular because the murder weapon was not found. After that, the detectives made a statement to the public, saying that they would not rest until the unknown shooter was punished. All this was intended to calm the local residents, who were outraged by the rampant crime and the powerlessness of the authorities. It was also assumed that the attack had been provoked by a feud between local gangs. In this case, Elle would be considered a random victim. However, all this was also just an assumption that remained to be verified. In the course of the investigation, it was possible to establish that the potential targets could have been Jake Dudley and Kieran Seld, members of the Beechwood gang, who were spending the evening in the pub. It became known that they had been in long-term, fierce conflict with another group claiming this territory. On December 29th, the police arrested another person, but he was not the one who opened fire. The suspect had a solid alibi that excluded him from the list of suspects. However, the detective suspected that he had participated in the setup for the attack. Around the same time, the dark Mercedes car in which the killer had left the pub parking lot was identified, but due to the lack of direct evidence, the name of the third suspect was also not disclosed. There were some difficulties with the found car. The car was traced through video surveillance systems and identified thanks to the cameras, but law enforcement officers were too late. On December 31st, the police department received the report that a fire had started near the scene of the shooting. When the special services arrived at the scene, they found a darkness fading similar to the perpetrator's vehicle, which was engulfed in flames. The vehicle was completely burned out. Valuable evidence was lost in the flames. The perpetrators clearly knew that the police were on their trail, so they decided to destroy one of the direct pieces of evidence. Despite the fact that the fire did not completely destroy the car, it was confirmed that it had been used during the shooting. However, the Mercedes did not belong to the perpetrators, but had been stolen shortly before the attack. Presumably, the arson was committed intentionally to complicate the investigation after the murder of competitors. On January 11th, two more suspects, a 22-year-old man and a 23-year-old woman, were delivered to the police department. They were arrested in Central Wales. The man's name was Connor Chapman. He was well known to the police. He had an extensive criminal record that he had accumulated over the past 5 years before the of Elbed-Wardsa. Connor had started with daring law breakings and gradually sank deeper into the abyss of crime. One of his first serious crimes was a car theft under aggravating circumstances. He had repeatedly become a suspect in robberies, hooliganism, and threatening behavior. Once the young man was involved in a chase with the police, after which he abandoned the car and hid in the bushes nearby. When they detained him, the criminal said that he did not understand what we're talking about and that he was here just waiting for a friend. In this case, he became the real star. The detainee's data ended up in newspaper headlines. Connor Chapman was from Birkenhead, Liverpool. His parents had left him at an early age, so his grandparents had formalized guardianship. It was in a house that the hero of the story moved. The teenager dropped out of high school shortly before the exams. In general, he studied poorly, and no special hopes were pinned on him. He was always considered a problem child. The young hooligan first became a defendant in a court case in 2014, when he was 14 years old. Connor was accused of shoplifting. As early as 2016, he committed another crime. His involvement in the theft of a car was proven when the young man was detained in a stolen vehicle. He did not have a driver's license or insurance, which was a violation of the terms of his suspended sentence. In 2017, car theft was added to the storage of prohibited substances. During this period, he was also under police supervision, so he had again violated the restramping order. As a result, he was banned from accessing several parts of the city. Connor was not allowed to appear in public places, as he clearly posed a threat to society. However, as early as 2019, he violated the ban again. The patrol detained him in a public place. The young man had a knife and prohibited substances with him. In the same year, the general public first heard about Connor Chapman. He appeared on the pages of the local newspaper after an unsuccessful attempt to escape from the police in a stolen car. The city patrol noticed a stolen Audi on the streets and ordered the driver to stop and get out of the car with his hands up. However, the 18-year-old Chapman did not obey, provoking a chase. During the short flight, Connor committed a large number of traffic violations. In particular, he accelerated to more than 80 kilometers per hour in areas with a 30-kilometer limit. Tanner repeatedly drove into oncoming traffic and in the end crashed into the curb. At speed, the car was thrown aside and turned around. The driver could not continue the orgy, so he got out of the car and ran away. However, even here he was unlucky, as the patrol caught up with him in the bushes just a few hundred meters away. In his defense, the young man said that he was waiting here for a friend, but the deception was obvious. The lawyer of Connor explained in court that his client had fallen under the influence of a bad company of alder frays. The court left him unpunished, and the need to release the budding criminal. He was found to have attention deficit disorder and a number of other disorders identified by private specialists during the trial. Despite this, due to numerous violations and potentially dangerous behavior on the road, he was sentenced to a term of up to 8 months in prison for 2 months. The young man also received a ban on driving a car, which was in effect after his release. Thus, the budding criminal had achieved 14 convictions for 30 criminal episodes by the time he reached adulthood. It was obvious that he had no intention of changing and categorically refused to fit into society. Everyone understood that he was potentially dangerous, but legal grounds for isolating him from society had not been found. This was due to the fact that so far no person had been seriously injured by his inadequate behavior. The public was outraged by the powerlessness of the authorities. Everything was shaping up so that the criminal elements could do nothing until they kill or maim innocent people. And that's how it turned out. In January 2020, the court again sentenced Connor Chapman, this time to 10 months in prison. He was again caught in a public place with a cold weapon and substances in his pocket. A whole bouquet of lists. During this period, the police openly appeared on TV channels, urging the public to beware of this young man. After serving his sentence, protected months, he again got involved in crime and was wanted for at least 5 criminal episodes. When he was caught, the young criminal said that he had spent more time behind bars than free, and he did not seem upset about this, but rather proud of his achievements. However, Connor had no intention of stopping there. By the age of 20, his service record had expanded again. By this point, he had received 19 sentences for 43 crimes. But in the summer of 2022, the inadequate young man found himself free again. This happened just 6 months before the death of L. Edwardson. During this period, Connor was again brought before the court. His lawyer tried to play on pity, telling the story that the first child of the young man was born while he was in prison. At this point, his girlfriend was pregnant with a girl. The young man claimed that he had rethought his life and wanted to get on the path of correction. Of course, these were loud, false words. The only thing he wanted was to get free and return to the path of crime. During this period, the police already knew that he was a member of one of the local criminal gangs engaged in the sale of prohibited substances. However, the criminal was tried not for these serious crimes, but for burglary and theft of 2 electric motorcycles. On December 24, 322, a skirmish broke out between 2 rival criminal gangs. They began to argue over the division of the territory near the wooden church in Beechwood Estates. They failed to reach an agreement, after which the young gangster decided to take revenge. He armed himself with a submachine gun and waited for about 3 hours until he tracked down his targets. He wanted to kill Karen Seld and Jake Duffy, who had gone to the Moyac pub for rest. Shortly before midnight, the criminal drove up to the parking lot and began to observe. He identified his victims and waited for the right moment to attack, then ran out of the car and fired 12 bullets into the building. He managed to seriously injure Duffy, but despite the threat to his life, he survived the attack. However, the unlucky El Edwardsu was not so fortunate. 2 bullets hit her in the head. The young beauty fought for her life, but died in the arms of the hospital. The girl accidentally met the killer's targets that evening, and did not even suspect that the festive revelry could end so tragically. The pub was crowded, then 1 person was killed and 4 were wounded. One 22-year-old man was shot in the leg, a 24-year-old young man was wounded in the arm, and a 33-year-old man in the wrist. None of these injuries were life-threatening. Elle's friends tried to provide her with assistance and perform artificial respiration right on the spot. However, this was not enough to save her life. Elle's sister Lucy was much liked here. She lived in Dubai and flew home to celebrate Christmas with her family. Just minutes before the attack, she had left the establishment, so she was not affected at all. Later, Lucy recalled how she had wanted to take her sister with her, but the girl wanted to stay with her friends. On January 25, 2023, the funeral of the young girl took place. Hundreds of concerned people came to say goodbye to the random victim of gang showdowns. The body was brought to the local church in a hearse drawn by 4 white horses. Even the pub that had become the site of the girl's last celebration was closed that day as a mark of respect for her memory. The owner of the establishment published a message of support for Elle's family on his official social media page. Connor Chapman was charged with a whole list of charges, the main one of which was murder. It became known that the Perth had an accomplice, namely the 20-year-old Thomas. After the arrest and during the searches, a video recording was found on this young man, which had been made shortly before the attack. In it, Connor is handing over a weapon and saying that he is going to settle accounts with someone. After the attack, they together hid the stolen Mercedes in order to get rid of it later. The murder weapon was never found. However, the killer's DNA traces were found on one of the shell casings fired. It was obvious that it was Connor who loaded the weapon before the attack. In addition, red gloves were found during searches in his house, which were clearly visible in the CCTV footage from morning. After the crime, when the perpetrators had abandoned the car, they ordered a taxi under a false name. They used the driver's services to cover their tracks and confuse the investigation. Around 5 a.m., they returned to the place where the hidden car was located. Here, the criminals tried to cover their tracks. However, something went wrong. Ultimately, they decided to get rid of the car by setting it on fire. Thomas Nord was found guilty on all charges brought against him. In July 2023, the court sentenced him to 9 years in prison. This modest sentence was due to the fact that he had not yet managed to accumulate such a wide criminal history as his accomplice. Jake and Karen were wounded in the moment of the attack, but both managed to survive the assault. A look at their lifestyle made the aggression of one of the members of the rival gangs quite understandable. Both were members of the local Beechwood gang, which was openly in conflict with another group claiming this territory. It became known that on December 23, 2023, just a day before the attack with firearms, they had already been attacked. On that occasion, another person from Connor Chapman's group had assaulted them. Both were beaten but did not receive serious injuries. Apparently, they considered this a random fight and calmly went to relax in the pub. While the shooter awaited his sentence in the case of the murder of the innocent victim, both targets of his attack were already in prison. Karen was sentenced to 27 months in prison for an attack on members of the rival criminal group. Another 9 months were added to the sentence for the fight. His friend was sentenced to 2 years and 9 months for a similar offense. Obviously, they were trying to avenge the attempted murder. Prohibitive court orders were also issued against both of them, with a whole list of restrictions. Of course, this method did not allow protecting citizens from this gang of criminals. However, in case of further violations, more severe punishment could be applied to them due to ignoring the prescriptions. The public was outraged that potentially dangerous members of criminal gangs were getting away with minimum sentences after each crime. The bans were clearly ineffective and did not contribute absolutely anything to public safety. This became especially obvious when it was found that Chapman already had a ban on visiting that region where the pub was located. But this did not prevent him from stealing a car and coming to the public place, despite the fact that he also had a driving ban. The events that had occurred once again raised the question of toughening punishments and revising the existing norms of the legal system. However, so far this flawed system has not suffered any serious changes. At the trial on the case of L's murder, Connor tried to refute that it was he who appeared on the CCTV footage. According to him, during this period he was at home, packing Christmas gifts. However, a sufficient amount of evidence was collected to expose the lie. The hearings on the case lasted 3.5 weeks, during which all the circumstances preceding the attack were revealed. It became known that the reason for the attack was only the competition between the two criminal gangs dividing the territory nearby. The defendant did not even know the victim. He simply did not care about her fate, as well as the fate of all the other innocent people in the bar. He was driven only by blind fury, which he could never control. After the attempted murder of 2 competitors, Connor planned to flee to Spain to cover his tracks. He used a stolen car and also got rid of the murder weapon. Trying not to fall into the hands of the police, he avoided using any mode of transport. The detectives detained the criminal literally at the airport. After the arrest, Connor tried to deceive the police, claiming that the Mercedes he was seen driving on the day of the murder was not stolen. According to him, this was a common car of the criminal group, which they used for the distribution of substances. The guy claimed that he was not behind the wheel of the vehicle, and also continued to convince the jury that he did not open fire that evening. He was desperately trying to get out of the situation. The defendant stated that he had only just learned that someone from the criminal group had used the vehicle for an attack on the pub. Before the jury retired to consider the verdict, the father of the innocent victim made a short speech. He sincerely hoped that the criminal would never again be able to spend Christmas with his loved ones in freedom. The jurors, consisting of Pitiation and Sanjinshin, came to a unanimous decision after 3 hours of discussion. In their opinion, Connor Chapman was guilty of all the charges brought against him. He cynically committed the crime and did not repent of the fact that he accidentally killed the beautiful 26-year-old girl. The whole life that lay ahead of her, and he took it away. Instead of remorse, the heartless Connor spent several days carefully getting rid of all the evidence and traces of the murder that could link him to this bloody event. The motive for the attack was the competition between criminal games. On July 7, 2023, Connor was sentenced. He was sent to serve a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 48 years from the start of serving the sentence. After the verdict was announced, the victim's father victoriously raised his fist. The incident provoked a wave of public outrage. The residents of the city could not feel safe, knowing that they were at the junction of the confrontation between criminal games dividing spheres of influence. They knew that these people had a large amount of firearms and were not afraid to use them, as proved by the murder of Elle. The girl's father said he wanted to set up a foundation to support victims like his daughter. He believed that the main goal would be to fight to reduce the number of weapons in the hands of civilians. From the outside, the England family seemed like the epitome of perfection. Every Sunday, they attended church together, demonstrating exemplary piety. However, few people in their circle could imagine the secrets hidden behind the closed doors of this respective household. The story of William and Sandler began back in 1983, when they first met at church. He was 18, and she was only 16. With their parents' blessing, the young couple soon got married and settled in the small town of Logan, Ohio. Bill Inman considered himself a deeply religious man. Working as a builder, he dedicated his free time to serving at the Evangelical Church of the Tabernacle of Faith, located near Nelson Villa. There, Bill played musical instruments, while Sandra, being a housewife, supported her husband in his spiritual pursuits. In 1984, the couple welcomed their firstborn, a son named William Jr. To avoid confusion, the church community called the father Bill and the son Will. As the years flew by, Will gradually grew up. In 2001, when he turned 17, he met 15-year-old Summer Cook during a church service. The circumstances of their meeting remarkably resembled the love story of Bill and Sandra. The young couple dated for 3 years, and when Summer reached adulthood in 2004, they got married. The newlyweds immediately moved in with Will's parents in their spacious house in Logan. That same year, 39-year-old Bill Inman proclaimed himself a spiritual leader. He transformed his garage into a makeshift church and began holding services there. Despite the skepticism of local residents towards the self-proclaimed pastor, his mysterious home church gradually began attracting parishioners, first neighbors, and then their acquaintances. People came to pray, find solace, and leave donations. In 2005, Will and Summer became happy parents of a boy named Alex. However, along with the joys of parenthood, the young couple faced financial difficulties. Bill's church activities did not bring in substantial income, so the family decided to try their luck in another state. In search of a better life, the Inlands moved to Florida in 2006. In their new location, Bill and Will quickly found work in the construction industry building hotels. Meanwhile, Sandra and Summer took care of the home and raised little Alex. However, after just 2 years longing for their hometown, the family returned to Ohio. Unfortunately, during their absence, they had lost the right to buy back their previous house in Logan. They had to rent another place in the rural area of Vinton. Almost immediately after returning, in 2008, Will and Summer became parents again this time. They had a daughter named Kaylee. 2 years later, the couple's third child, a girl named Alana, was born. Despite the challenges of young children, the young parents tried to set aside time for themselves. Almost every weekend, they left the kids under the care of Bill and Sandra, who gladly took on the roles of grandmother and grandfather. For the elderly couple, their grandchildren became the true meaning of life. In the spring of 2010, Bill Inman officially became a pastor, heading the Church of the Tabernacle of Faith. Together with his wife, he also founded a charitable organization called Ranch of Mercy, aiming to help the underprivileged, those who had lost their jobs or homes. Bill dreamed of building a large shelter for orphans and widows with his own hands. However, there was a lack of funds to realize this plan. That's when Bill came up with the idea of holding a lottery. By selling tickets for $10 each, he hoped to raise the necessary amount. The lucky winner would receive a new house or $200,000. Additionally, Bill promised to raffle off 99 other valuable prizes. Information about the lottery was disseminated through local media and advertising. Bill personally went door to door, urging people to join the good cause and purchase tickets. He assured that the proceeds would go towards building a shelter for the needy. In total, Inman managed to sell 100,000 tickets and raise $1 million. The prize draw was scheduled for September 2010. While Bill was engaged in charity work, problems were brewing in the Inman's personal life. In June 2010, Summer confessed to her husband that she wanted a divorce after 6 years of marriage. Shortly before this, she made a bitter entry in her diary. "Because right now, I'm just a slave who follows orders. I love my children endlessly and wouldn't trade them for anything. But I don't want them to see their mother simply obeying someone else's will." I don't know how Will is going to react to this. Maybe he'll get furious, try to take the kids and run away, or start threatening hurting me. I think we should have equal time with the children. I know his parents will be against it and will try to convince me to stay, but I understand that it won't change anything. Yesterday, Will asked me what I want, and I couldn't answer, because I only know what I don't want to be unhappy to feel trapped. But I remain silent. Every day, all I can do is cry and sleep, nothing more. I just don't know how to get out of this situation and make everything all right. I hope that the next time I write here, I'll have found the answer. Summer filed for divorce and moved out of the Inman's house with the children and essential belongings to her parents' home. She didn't want to deprive Alex, Kaylee, and Alana of communication with their father, so she allowed them to see Will and his parents. 2 months after leaving her husband, Summer started a romance with Adam Peters. At the same time, she got a job as a cleaner at a bank located in the center of Logan. The woman had no education, so she couldn't find other work. Meanwhile, September and October passed, but the house lottery promised by Bill from Ranch of Mercy never took place. Moreover, it turned out that the construction of the prize house hadn't even begun. The organization was in no hurry to return people's money for the tickets. In early December 2010, the Inmans were informed about the need to vacate their rented housing due to debt. Upon learning this, Summer came with Adam to pick up the belongings that were left there. However, Will and his parents didn't let their former daughter-in-law in. Summer called the police and complained that her husband, whom she was divorcing, was threatening her and wouldn't give back her personal belongings. When law enforcement arrived, Will continued to refuse to let anyone into the house, threatened to shoot Adam, and even got into a fight with a police officer. In her statement, Summer said that before the wedding, she and Will had an ideal relationship. But after getting married, he changed abruptly, started controlling her every step, being jealous, and making groundless accusations. He dictated to his wife what to do and when, interfering in the most intimate areas of life, eating habits, household chores, even sexual relations. Summer couldn't even get enough sleep without her husband's permission. He effectively kept her under house arrest, forbidding her to leave the home. He hid her mobile phone and keys. The woman admitted that Will dreamed of having 12 children with her and even planned to take a second wife. He could often be seen on websites for polygamous families where he posted his explicit photos. Will threatened to kill Summer if she dared to leave him. Once he even took her beloved cats, drove them somewhere, and then lied that they had escaped through an open window. He laughed, saying she would never see them again. After his wife's accusations, Will tried to justify himself. He claimed he took away her phone and keys because he suspected her of cheating. As for the cats, he simply took them to a shelter because they were scratching the furniture and attacking family members. Will was prohibited from approaching Summer and was sentenced to a fine and probation. At the same time, a custody battle erupted between the two families. The Inmans filed a police report, accusing Adam Peters of being dangerous to Alex, Kaylee, and Alana. A terrifying event occurred late in the evening of March 22, 2011. 25-year-old Summer was finishing her shift at the bank. As usual, she cleaned up the workspaces and went outside around 11 p.m. to take out the trash. Before that, Summer had sent a message to Adam, whom she was supposed to meet after work, but he never saw his beloved again. Worried, Adam went to the bank after midnight. He didn't find Summer, but near saw her belongings, her phone, keys, a running player with headphones. A little further, in the bushes, lay her jacket. Adam called the police and informed Summer's parents about her disappearance. At first, the family thought the woman might have been delayed at work or lost her personal items. But the bank's security service assured them they hadn't seen her after the end of her shift. When law enforcement arrived at the scene, several witnesses were already waiting. Two women who were out for a jog at the time said they had witnessed Summer being abducted by unknown individuals an hour earlier. According to them, when the woman approached the dumpster, a white Ford Crown Victoria driven by a blonde pulled up. Two men in black balaclavas jumped out of the car, grabbed Summer, and forcibly pushed her into the back seat. The victim resisted, screamed, and begged for help. One of the witnesses tried to intervene, but the female driver sprayed pepper spray in his face. After that, the kidnappers fled with Summer. The women immediately ran to the nearest police station and reported what they had seen. However, for some reason, law enforcement treated their statement with skepticism, even suspicion. They decided that the witnesses had made up this story for fun. A whole hour passed after Summer's parents contacted the police before they finally arrived at the crime scene. Unfortunately, it was too late. The missing woman could not be found while the trail was still hot. News of the abduction of 25-year-old Summer Inman instantly spread through the local media. Hundreds of concerned residents of Logan rallied to help with the search. But days passed, and hope of finding the woman alive faded. The parents of the missing tried not to think about the worst. A few weeks before the tragedy, Summer had posted a photo on Facebook with Adam and the children. In it, they looked like a happy family. Seeing this photo on Adam's page, Will Inman became genuinely enraged. There had long been a quiet confrontation between these two men. It turned out that Summer had met Adam even before deciding to divorce her husband. In the spring of 2010, Peters got a job working for the Inmans, taking care of their house and yard. That's where he fell for Summer. Initially, the woman rejected Adam's advances but eventually gave in. In her diary, there was an entry. "When our eyes met, I realized that the devil had taken hold of me. I didn't listen to the voice of God. I tried to stop myself. My mind screamed, 'Run. Get out of here now.' But I stayed and allowed Adam to embrace me and then delve deeper. I regret it. I am guilty." Meeting Adam was the beginning of the end for Summer and Will's marriage. The woman realized that she wanted to be happy, to love and be loved. So she filed for divorce. 5 days before Summer's disappearance, Will tried to challenge the amount of alimony in court. He didn't want to pay his ex-wife $150 per child every month and asked to reduce the amount to $50. After all, at that time, his annual income was only $6,500 a month. Will, along with his parents, fought for sole custody of the children, but the judge rejected their demands. Bill and Sandra missed their grandchildren very much, as they were the meaning of their lives. After parting with Summer, the elderly couple had noticeably lost weight and become haggard. In March 2011, shortly after Summer's disappearance, the police found the Inman family. Bill, Sandra, and Will were hiding in the home of Bill's mother, a 70-year-old woman from Jackson County, Ohio. During the interrogation, all three unanimously assured that they were not involved in Summer's abduction. They claimed that on the night in question, they had gone to Cleveland to look at a new house. On the way, the car broke down, and they had to spend the whole night repairing it on the side of the road. They only returned home to Logan in the morning. The Inman said that they had always treated Summer well and rarely argued with her. But ever since Alan Peters appeared in their home, a dark streak had begun. Bill, Sandra, and Will called Adam a bad person who had destroyed a once happy and strong family. The police were interested in the Ford Crown Victoria parked near the Inman's house. They confiscated the car's GPS navigator and checked the route. It turned out that on the afternoon of March 22nd, when the kidnapping occurred, the car was in Logan. In the evening, at 5:30 p.m., the GPS was turned off and only turned back on the next morning, March 23rd, again in Logan. No evidence of the Inman's trip to Cleveland could be found. Moreover, according to telephone records, all night from March 22nd to 23rd, the suspects were in Logan. Then information came in that on the morning of March 23rd, at 7:30 a.m., Bill, Sandra, and Will were seen at a car wash. They took the car for a full interior cleaning. Summer was not with them. After that, the Indians went to Cleveland, where they changed tires at an auto repair shop. The mechanic found it strange that Bill decided to replace almost new tires with old ones. Allegedly, he simply didn't like the previous ones. The Inmans also tried to change the appearance of the car. Bill removed the police spotlight he had once installed near the side mirror. After the arrest, Bill tried to convince his elderly mother that they were not guilty of anything and that these trials were God's punishment. However, after several hours of interrogation, realizing that all three of them faced the death penalty, Sandra gave in. The woman confessed that it was them who had kidnapped Summer on that fateful night. The men in balaclavas were her husband Bill and son Will. According to Sandra, the abduction was entirely her idea. She only wanted to scare her daughter-in-law so that she would allow Will to see the children. When Summer was pushed into the car, Will tied her hands, feet, and neck with plastic ties. The woman fought and screamed, and then suddenly fainted. Will noticed that Summer was showing no signs of life. He wanted to cut the bindings and free her. He shouted to his mother, "Mom, where's the knife? I can't find it." While the family was frantically searching for the knife, a few minutes passed. It was too late to save Summer, as she had suffocated. Sandra swore they didn't want to kill their daughter-in-law, only to scare her in order to settle the custody dispute over the grandchildren and have the opportunity to see them at least on weekends. On March 29, 2011, a week after the abduction, Sandra showed where they had hidden the body. Summer was thrown into an abandoned well on the grounds of the church the Inman family attended. The Church of the Tabernacle of Faith is located near Nelsonville, 30 kilometers from the bank where Summer worked. Once, Bill Inman had participated in its construction, and 28 years ago, under the arches of this temple, he and Sandra got married. When the police lifted the concrete lid of the well, a gruesome sight met their eyes. Summer lay at the bottom, her body thrown in head first. The victim was wearing the same clothes as on the last day of her life, a black t-shirt with the words, "I don't have an anger problem, I have an idiot problem." The autopsy showed that Summer had died of strangulation. There were no other injuries on her body, except for marks from the plastic ties on her neck, wrists, and ankles. Sandra said that she had initially planned to throw the body into the river, but then she decided that in the church well, no one would definitely find it. The woman admitted her guilt and expressed sincere regret for what she had done. Soon the trial took place. 49-year-old Bill and 28-year-old Bl did not plead guilty to Summer's murder. They barely spoke during the hearings and avoided looking her parents in the eye. Only Sandra repented for what she had done and tried to take all the responsibility upon herself. She repeated that the abduction was her idea. Delivering her final statement, the woman begged for forgiveness from Summer's parents through tears. Emotions were choking Sandra, but despite this, everyone understood that she sincerely regretted what had happened. "Summer was like a daughter to me," the woman sobbed. "If I could turn back time, I would never have taken this horrible step." In 2012, the court passed the sentence. Bill and Will Ingman received life imprisonment without the right to early release. Sandra was sentenced to life in prison with the right to parole after 15 years. The church friends and parishioners unanimously claimed that Bill was in charge of everything in the Ingman family. He was the one making the decisions. No one believed that the idea of the kidnapping belonged to Sandra. Everyone knew that Will had been a spoiled boy since childhood, with his parents indulging his every whim. The defendant herself understood that her husband and son were just as guilty as she was. But Sandra tried to take the blame until the very end, hoping to soften their fate. Alex, Kaylee, and Alana remained under the care of Summer's deceased parents. For a long time, they could not explain to their grandchildren where their mother, father, grandmother, and grandfather had gone. The tragedy of the Ingman family serves as a warning about how hidden anger, jealousy, and the desire to control someone else's life can lead to fatal consequences. Bill and Sandra, who were a model of piety and family values to everyone, turned out to be real tyrants to their daughter-in-law. Summer became a victim of a toxic relationship where her will and desires were suppressed, and attempts to break free cost her life. Will, raised in such a suffocating atmosphere, grew up selfish and unwilling to compromise. His obsession with the idea of getting his wife and children back at any cost ultimately turned against him. The Ingmans' terrible crime forever destroyed several families, deprived 3 small children of their mother, and a grandfather and grandmother of their closest person. Emily Longley was born in England in 1994 to Mark and Caroline Longley. 2 years later, her parents had another child, Emily's younger sister Hannah. From early childhood, the girls were very close to each other. They lived in a loving and caring family. When Emily was 9 and Hannah was 7, the family moved to New Zealand. Auckland became their new home. When Emily fell in with the wrong crowd after emigrating to New Zealand, her middle-class parents sent her back to the UK to start a new life with her grandparents. In 2010, Emily flew to England to study at Brockenhurst College. She wanted to get a business degree and dreamed of becoming a model. In England, she lived at her grandparents' house in Bournemouth. Bournemouth, adjacent to Poole in the west, is a town in the county of Dorset, a popular resort on the English Channel coast. When Emily moved to England, her sister Hannah was still at school, and her parents, Mark and Caroline, divorced but maintained a friendly relationship. Emily was a beautiful young woman who attracted much attention. One day, she met 20-year-old Elliot Turner. He made quite an impression on her. Gradually, their communication grew into a romantic relationship. In April 2011, Emily returned to New Zealand to visit her family, whom she had not seen for about 6 months. Her father met her at the airport. She ran up to him and hugged him tightly, saying she missed him very much. Emily had a very close relationship with her father, who loved her madly and missed her smile, laughter, and dirty jokes. The following day, the whole family went to Emily's favorite pizzeria. She told her parents that, apart from studying in college, she was engaged in modeling and made some incredible friends. She also mentioned the man she was dating, 20-year-old Elliot Turner. They had only been dating for a few months, and it seemed to her that she was too young for something serious. "I think I'm going to end it when I go back," she said. Emily spent the next few weeks hanging out with friends and family. She had a wonderful time. No one suspected they would soon lose her. When Emily's flight started boarding, it was hard for her to say goodbye to her family. However, Emily promised she would be back in 5 months. She wanted to see the matches of the Rugby World Cup, which was to begin on September 9th. While texting with her father a few days later, Emily informed him about breaking up with Elliot, but she did not go into details. Elliot behaved strangely after seeing the photos of Emily that she posted on social networks while in New Zealand. There were guys in these photos, and Elliot was very jealous. The son of a wealthy jeweler, Elliot Turner, was 20 years old, and his life seemed carefree. Turner was well known in the local bar and club scene in the Bournemouth and Poole areas, and was part of a gang of wealthy young men called the Firm. Called by his friends All Talk Turner because of his boasting, he met Emily in December 2010. The couple enjoyed the high life at the resort and often had fun until late at night, but Turner, who had a history of obsession with women, soon showed signs of jealousy. As a result, their relationship quickly escalated into violent arguments. Some people described him as a person displaying a threatening, aggressive, violent, controlling, and possessive nature. In January 2008, when he was 16, he received a harassment warning letter from the police telling him not to contact his ex-girlfriend after he bombarded her with text messages and emails because she broke up with him. Turner loved being at the center of attention. He didn't need to work for a living. His parents gave him everything he needed. Elliot skillfully manipulated people, including his parents. His life was all about parties, women, alcohol, and illegal substances. He considered himself a man who can do anything he wants. Elliot carried a hammer with him in case anyone tried to contradict him. His friends believed that Turner fancied himself a gangster and wanted to become the one everyone turned to for help. He could come to the bar and buy everyone a drink. Elliot bragged about driving a new Mini Cooper, but it was a gift from his grandmother. He tried to maintain his bad boy image with a series of supposedly streetwise messages on social networking sites where he often referred to himself as Scarface or God. He didn't lack female attention, but when he met Emily, he became very attached to her. She complimented his image of a successful person, which he worked hard to create. As their relationship developed, Turner started showing his controlling behavior more and more often. He even threatened Emily that he would take her life. In an emotional plea to Turner, Emily wrote a note to him a few months before her death saying, 1. I love you. 2. Don't say you'll kill me. 3. Stop talking about your ex-girlfriends. 4. Stop being so constantly aggressive. 5. Be more cruel, because that is so much more hot, and you make me scared because you're so intimidating. When Turner began to show his true face, and when his controlling behavior started to go beyond all reasonable limits, Emily realized that he was not the person she wanted to be with. However, people like Turner don't understand rejection. On the evening of May 6, 2011, Emily was with friends in one of the entertainment venues. Surveillance cameras captured how she came to a nightclub with her friends. That evening, Turner read her Facebook messages and discovered that Emily was dating another man. It pissed him off. He came to the club and started arguing with Emily. This whole story ended with the girl throwing her drink in his face. Turner verbally abused her and threatened her with violence. He didn't like Emily's outfit. He thought it was too revealing. He dismissed the fact that Emily had broken up with him. The man wasn't going to let her go. Elliot ruined her evening, so she decided to leave. Yet, her ex-boyfriend followed her. His friends heard him say, "I will kill her. I will go to prison for it and still be a millionaire. I would do 10 years, it wouldn't bother me." Turner caught up with Emily, somehow persuading her to go to his house. He said he wanted to talk in a more relaxed atmosphere. Elliot Turner lived with his parents. Perhaps that's why Emily went with him. Maybe she thought he would behave more calmly in the presence of his parents. Neighbors saw them go inside the house. The following morning, Anita Turner, Elliot's mother, called the emergency service, saying Emily was not waking up. It was about 9 a.m. Before the arrival of the ambulance, Anita listened to the operator's instructions on how to help Emily. Unfortunately, when the ambulance arrived, the only thing they could do was to state the death of Emily Longley. Anita was an Indonesian citizen who came to the UK to marry Lee Turner. When the couple had a son, they did not deny him anything, which was a big mistake. During her conversation with the emergency service operator, Anita's voice did not sound like the voice of a mother who had just found her son's girlfriend dead. She was too calm, as if nothing unusual had happened. Thousands of miles from England, in New Zealand, Emily's father, Mark, woke up at 2 in the morning and saw a bunch of missed calls from his ex-wife, Caroline, and younger daughter, Hannah. There was also a voice message from Hannah, but Mark could barely make out what she was saying. Then he heard Caroline scream in the background, and her words, "Emily is dead." Mark refused to believe it. He called his mother in England. When she answered, his whole world fell apart. His mother was crying hysterically. Moments later, one of the police officers took her phone. "I am sorry to tell you that your daughter Emily is dead," he said. Mark couldn't believe it. After all, Emily was sitting on his couch and smiling just a week ago. Flying to the UK, the grief-stricken father still refused to believe that his daughter was dead. But unfortunately, it wasn't a dream. The loss of the eldest daughter was a heartbreaking challenge for Emily's parents. The police told them that Emily had died in her sleep. It didn't make any sense. She was young and healthy. The police collected some evidence, but it was unclear what happened to Emily. They had to wait for the autopsy results. Elliot Turner's parents, Anita and Lee, told investigators they had been home all night and had not heard anything suspicious. Elliot publicly mourned Emily by posting photos of them together on his Facebook page. The police had nothing bulletproof to refute the story of Turner and his parents that Emily mysteriously died in her sleep. During the investigation of any death, the main factor is to determine the cause of it. When investigators discover the cause of the victim's death, they understand what they are dealing with and how to conduct an investigation. While waiting for the autopsy results, the investigators found out that a few days before her death, Emily had posted something strange on her Facebook page. "I have a stalker," she added. "Someone just called me and I was like, 'Who's this?' And they were like, 'You don't know me, but I know everything about you.' And I was like, 'How did you get my number?' And he was like, 'He'll tell you when I see you,' and kept asking me out. So I hung up and they won't stop calling," Emily wrote on Thursday, May 5th. At the same time, the police managed to find out that before her death, Emily quarreled with Elliot Turner in front of other nightclub guests. After interviewing Turner's friends, investigators learned that he tried to control Emily's every move, that he found out about her meeting with another man, and most importantly, that Elliot threatened to take her life many times. But his friends did not attach any importance to this, believing that these were just words with which Turner strengthened his image of a gangster. The autopsy did not give an exact cause of Emily's death. However, experts mentioned it could be strangulation, and one of them said, "The physical findings are entirely consistent with pressure being applied to the neck." Investigators believed that one of the Turner family members could be involved in Emily's death, so they decided to install listening devices in their house. The police were hoping to find out if they were hiding anything, and they were right to do that. They heard Elliot instructing his mother on how to behave with the police and what she needed to say. His father, Lee Turner, seemed to be the only person who understood what he was doing was wrong. But eventually, he submitted to the will of his son and wife. While listening to the recordings, investigators also heard what happened to Emily Longley. Elliot Turner admitted that he caused her death. They arrested Elliot Turner a week after Emily's death. He, of course, denied his guilt. His lawyers tried to challenge the authenticity of those audio recordings. However, having studied all aspects of this case, the judge allowed the prosecution to use the recordings as evidence. Not knowing the police were listening, Elliot admitted that he felt angry every day, and that no one had ever pissed him off as much as Emily. During the trial in May 2012, his lawyer stated that their client acted in self-defense. Elliot Turner said that the quarrel in his bedroom turned violent, and he had to grab Emily by the neck. He said he didn't strangle her, he just found her dead in his bed the next morning. During the second day of the trial, Turner told the court that he was disgusted by his actions that night. Allegedly, after finding Emily dead, he wrote a letter to his mother, saying how ashamed he was and that he was leaving for Spain. One can assume Elliot Turner was going to leave the country on the day of Emily's death, but changed his mind for some reason. When the police arrived at Turner's home after the 999 call, they saw packed bags. Elliot's passport was in his pocket. He admitted in court that he had threatened Emily and felt upset and deceived the night before her death, after seeing false emails on her phone saying he had smashed her face into a table. When describing the fight they had before her death, he mentioned Emily started beating him with her hands and feet. He tried to calm her down before giving up and throwing her a 20-pound note for a cab. He said, "She just ignored me at first. Then, 5 seconds later, she just went crazy. I had never seen Emily get to that point of rage. I didn't know what to do. She would not stop. I kept repeating myself, 'Stop it, calm down.' At that point, I grabbed her by the neck using my right hand." Defense counsel Anthony Dunn asked, "Why did you do that?" Turner replied, "To stop her going nuts. I did not know what to do. My right hand made contact with her neck." When the defense counsel asked how hard he grabbed her, Turner replied, "I would not say very hard, but it was quite hard. I grabbed her and pushed her down onto the bed. I pressed down on her neck when she was in the lying down position." He said he held her there for 5 or 6 seconds, then let go and stormed out of the room. When asked if he intended to kill Emily, Turner replied no. He said he thought Emily had gone to sleep. Allegedly, he realized Emily was dead only when she did not wake up the following morning. In an interview with the Herald newspaper, Emily's father, Mark, spoke about how hard it was for him to lose his daughter. "Here is the thing about death. It sucks. It doesn't matter if it is your child, your partner, or your 99-year-old grandmother. It sucks that a person is there one day and not the next. Well, it is not something we can deal with easily. All anniversaries are hard. Birthdays are hard. Christmas is hard. Easter is also tough because it was the last time I really spent time with her," Mark longingly said. He said the heaviest part was that he would never see the woman she could have become. "I miss seeing the life she was denied unfold. We had a brief glimpse of the woman she was becoming, and I was so proud of her. I am her father and of course am biased, but the world really was a better place with her in it. It was certainly a lot more fun." At the trial, they portrayed Elliot Turner as a spoiled, wealthy kid whose parents wanted to help him escape punishment. The court heard he was given the run of the family's home in the affluent Queen's Park area of Bournemouth, where he would hold parties for his middle-class friends. Described as wild by his father Lee, he was given his own living space in the converted garage of his parents' house, so he could come and go without disturbing them. It was in his room, which had its own minibar, that he strangled Emily on his bed. The police examined the computers seized from Turner's and found the following search queries: death by strangulation, and how to avoid punishment for a crime. The main motive of the crime was jealousy. The court heard testimony from Luke Ashford, who spent the night with Emily. As already mentioned, Elliot Turner found out about it. Even while in custody, Turner boasted that the jury would believe his twisted story that Emily had attacked him, and he had acted in self-defense when he strangled her in a fit of jealousy. In letters from his prison cell to his friends, he said he would soon drive a new Range Rover and move to Spain. He planned to sell the rights to his story and live a fashionable life. However, the jury quickly shattered his illusions when they found him guilty. On May 22, 2012, the court sentenced Elliot Turner to life in prison with a minimum term of 16 years. Announcing the verdict, Mrs. Justice Dobbs described Turner as a man of striking arrogance. She said, "Emily was a lovely, kind, fun-loving girl who brought a ray of sunshine to those she touched. That light has been extinguished suddenly and needlessly by you. You did not love her. She was just a trophy. The relationship, if it can be called that, was all about you. It was about control. Control you carried out using aggression and threats. You can put away thoughts of champagne, Bentleys, and girls and concentrate on the reason you are serving a life sentence." Mrs. Justice Dobbs also sentenced Turner to 9 months to run concurrently for perverting the course of justice. But Elliot Turner wasn't the only person on trial. His parents, Anita and Lee, whom Turner used for cash to fund his lavish partying, loved their son so much they tried to cover his crime. Lee destroyed Turner's confession letter, and Anita took the jacket from the bedroom where the letter allegedly was. His mother even postponed calling an ambulance so her son could cover his tracks and let the family come up with a convincing story for the police. When asked why she did not call an ambulance, Anita Turner replied that she did not believe Emily was dead. Under cross-examination, they asked her if she thought Emily had ruined her son's life. After a pause of 6 seconds, she replied no. In the recording, Lee asked Anita whether they had done the right thing. "We've done the right thing," Anita replied. Both 51-year-old Anita Turner and 54-year-old Lee Turner were found guilty of perverting the course of justice and sentenced to 27 months in prison. Mrs. Justice Linda Dobbs said, "The two of you chose to fight the case, showing little remorse. Mr. Turner, you claimed you didn't know the contents of the letter when you destroyed it, but the fact it was burning on your conscience is quite evident from your anguished tone of voice on the tape." Released in 2013 after serving half of their sentence, they still live in the house where Emily Longley died. Emily's dad, Mark, broke down as he spoke about the verdicts after the case. Supported by former wife Caroline and daughter Hannah, he said, "What we have heard over these 5 weeks has shocked us and disgusted us. That a man so evil like Turner could treat a gentle and loving girl like Emily so violently is beyond belief. We are so proud of the fact that she had come halfway around the world to cause a better life for herself. This is a life Turner decided to end." Mark said there was a lot of talk about Turner's boasting and that no one had taken his threats seriously until it was too late. He added, even his mother did not take him seriously when he texted her to tell her he was going to break Emily's neck. Perhaps if someone had taken his threats seriously, Emily might be with us today. I hope Turner suffers every day in prison for what he has done. In October 2020, the press reported that Elliot Turner's cellmates had beaten him in prison. It happened after he hung up photos of Emily in his cell and boasted of receiving letters from female fans. Some of his cellmates attacked him after he said he would soon return to his life full of champagne, Bentleys, and birds. In 5 years, Turner will have the right to apply for early release from prison. One can only hope that common sense will prevail and that the parole board will make the right decision regarding a person who still has no remorse for his actions. The case of Jordan Worth, a sadist with an angelic face. Statistics on victims of domestic violence are not just difficult to keep, but virtually impossible because many people simply do not seek help, not wanting to make a fool of themselves, so to speak. Sometimes people endure years of abuse, beatings, and humiliation, and some facts are revealed only when the irreparable happens. Simply put, these statistics are often based on dead bodies. The case of a young English woman named Jordan Worth made headlines across the country in 2018 and was in many ways, if not unique, then at least special. First, this fragile person with an angelic appearance destroyed the stereotype that cruel tyrants and abusers in relationships are men because they are trivially stronger physically. And secondly, she became the first woman in British history to receive a real prison sentence for domestic violence and coercive control, because previously on such charges only men were imprisoned. Fortunately, tragedy was avoided in this story, but the very fact that a young woman and mother of 2 children almost tortured to death, the father of her heirs, causes at the very least bewilderment. And now let's understand how in principle such a situation could develop and why Worth's chosen one, Alex Skeel, tolerated inhuman treatment for so long and did not go to the police, even when his life was in real danger. Alex Skeel's life before he met Jordan Worth. Alexander was born in 1995, August 17th, in a town called Kingston-upon-Hull, in a fairly well-to-do, friendly and loving family. He and his twin brother were welcome and long-awaited children, but they were born much earlier than expected, because of which doctors seriously feared for them and did not make any prognosis. The boys spent the first months of their lives in the hospital, in special chambers for premature babies with critically low body weight. But thanks to the efforts of experienced doctors, the children soon recovered. True, Alexander's brother gained weight faster, and by the first birthday, he had practically no traces and consequences of prematurity. But Alex himself turned out to be weaker. Moreover, he suffered from excessive accumulation of fluid in the brain, hydrocephalus, because of which he received a disability. Nevertheless, Alexander's health problems from birth did not affect his intellectual development, and physically he was not much different from his peers, and even actively engaged in sports at school. Spouses Skeel adored their sons, from infancy surrounded them with love and care, as well as spared no effort and money to give them a good education and provide a better life. After graduating from high school, both brothers entered the prestigious Bedford College, where they continued their studies. Alexander was smart enough, had an attractive appearance, tried to regularly attend the gym, and in general enjoyed success with the opposite sex. Except that, unlike his brother who willingly went on dates and had affairs, he was quite shy and more focused on his studies. Love at first sight. It was in college that Alex met a young beauty named Jordan Worth. The girl was his age, she grew up in a wealthy family, and from a young age she knew almost nothing to refuse. She dressed beautifully and expensively, carefully watched her appearance, and led an active social life. Jordan was considered one of the most popular girls in college, which tried to court many guys. In addition, she, in parallel with her studies, worked as a volunteer, raising funds and organizing assistance to local shelters for homeless animals, as well as starving children in Africa. Worth was even repeatedly recognized for her efforts, and for trying to make the world a better place. At first glance, this girl seemed a real angel in the flesh, kind, sympathetic, in addition, intelligent and beautiful. Alexander fell in love with her at first sight, but at first thought that bright and popular Jordan will not even pay attention to him. However, as it turned out, he also immediately appealed to her, and she herself became the initiator of their acquaintance. Worth was much more experienced in amorous affairs, but for modest skill, she was the very first love of his life. Young people in love spent a lot of time together, and were practically inseparable. In college, they were called the most beautiful couple, which was very flattering to Jordan. The first 6 months of the relationship were filled with love, romance, and mutual respect. Students tried to make each other pleasant surprises, gave cute gifts on small, but already so important for them, dates. In their accounts and social networks, daily appeared joint photos on which they were happy together. The pictures were accompanied by touching captions and declarations of love. From the outside, it seemed that these two were simply made for each other, and a long and happy life was ahead of them. Quite quickly, the young people decided to live together and rented an apartment. Since they were both still students, significant financial assistance was provided by their parents, who, by the way, were not against the relationship of the couple. Jordan even liked Alexander's parents because she seemed to be a serious girl, planned to become a teacher of art history, and in general, made a positive impression on others. However, time passed, and Worth's behavior began to change. It all started with increased control, which increased with each month of their life together. The woman demanded from her young man to report to her every step, unapologetically checked his personal correspondence in the phone, email, as well as social networks, arranged wild scenes of jealousy literally in the same place, and without any reason. Alexander tried not to pay attention to this because he was in love, and such behavior of his passions did not bother him too much. Even when the beloved began to choose his own clothes, forcing him to wear only what she buys, the guy wrote it off as care on her part. Soon the woman began to limit the circle of socialization of her boyfriend. Jordan herself chose with whom and when he can see, and with whom he can no longer keep in touch. Under this separation fell not only friends and fellow students of Skeel, but also members of his family. As Worth got away with it, her boyfriend never complained to anyone, and they continued to look like a happy, perfect couple in public and on social media. The young lady began, literally, to revel in her impunity. She deleted contacts from Alexander's phone, without his knowledge blocked his family and friends, and even responded to messages on his behalf, often in a rude and insulting form, and after Jordan erased the correspondence, so that the guy did not even know what he said to people, from which they no longer wanted to communicate with him. The last straw, and the breakup, the first alarm was raised by Alexander's twin brother, when Jordan began to prevent their communication. By that time, the parents of the brothers also noticed that Alex distanced himself from the family and his beloved, and it all began to avoid them, refusing to come to visit, even on holidays, and not wanting to communicate even on the phone, and on all attempts to get in touch with her, the woman was frankly rude. In those rare moments when the mother was able to get through to her son, she asked him to leave his chosen one, warning that nothing good will come out of this affair. But the young man in love did not want to listen to anyone, and defended his girlfriend, claiming that she just so takes care of him, and does not wish anyone anything bad. Soon the Skeel family became aware that Worth forced their son to drop out of college, leave sports, and get a job. At the same time, the woman took away from her lover all the money he earned, and spent it on his own needs and entertainment. Then the parents again made an attempt to talk to their son, and convince him to leave Jordan, but their efforts were again unsuccessful. In 2013, during the celebration of his adulthood, Worth committed a disgusting act, which she got away with. On that day, she and her friends celebrated the solemn event in a country hotel, and at some point closer to the night, when the guests have already begun to disperse, the woman, without saying anything to anyone, simply disappeared. Alexander literally went crazy trying to find his beloved, and worried that something might have happened to her. She returned to their room in the morning, being in a state of strong alcoholic intoxication, and when the guy tried to find out where she was, she just attacked him with fists and insults, and then laughed and said that she was going to report to him. 2 months later, while celebrating Alexander's own 18th birthday, Jordan got into a fight in front of her boyfriend's family and friends. She beat up a 15-year-old girl neighbor, whom the Skeel family knew well, and had invited to the family party. Worth thought the woman was talking too sweetly to Alex, so she attacked her, pulling her hair and scratching her face. Jordan was barely calmed down, but it was clear to everyone what she was really like. After that, parents and brother insisted that Alexander broke up with the girl, who behaved so aggressively and inadequately. Surprisingly, but the guy listened to them for the first time, and agreed that his chosen one overreacted. The same evening he talked to her, and said that he would not return to their apartment, but would stay to live in his parents' house. The reunion and the birth of their shared children, it's been almost 6 months since the couple broke up. Alex returned to his studies, but continued to work. He almost no longer thought about Jordan, when on the eve of New Year's Eve 2014, she unexpectedly called and informed him that she was pregnant, and in the spring they would become parents. The guy was surprised and delighted with such news, and the woman apologized to him and said that she had not informed him earlier because she was sure that he did not want to see her anymore. The parents of the guy, having learned that they will soon have a grandchild, also melted, and themselves offered the woman to move into their house. Worth agreed and moved into the Skeel family home. She officially married the father of her child, and 3 months later she and Alexander had a common son, William. The young parents and grandparents were unspeakably happy, and until about mid-fall 2014, they lived amicably and quietly. It was a short period when Jordan really cared about her chosen one, tried in every possible way to please him, and fell in love with the guy anew. When William was 6 months old, it turned out that the girl was pregnant again. At this time she again became capricious and hysterical, and demanded from Alexander that they immediately move out of his parents' house. The guy wrote off such behavior on raging hormones, but agreed to rent them housing in the city, where they soon moved. In the summer of 2015, the couple had a second common child, a girl, to whom they gave the name Alice. Alexander was absolutely happy, and literally carried his wife and children in his arms. But Jordan, finally convinced that the chosen one will not go anywhere from her now, showed the darkest corners of her soul. The turning point. After the move, Worth again forbade her husband to communicate with his family, and did not let his parents see their grandchildren. At the same time, the woman willingly accepted from them financial assistance, and sometimes even made Alex himself to ask his parents for money. In just a few months, she completely subjugated his will, breaking him psychologically, and took his life under her total control. Jordan regularly humiliated and insulted her husband, and at one point she started hitting him. At first not violently, as if testing how he would react, how he would behave, and when the woman realized that her husband would tolerate everything, would not tell anyone, and nothing would happen to her for this. She gave free rein to her cruelty, displaying sophisticated, sadistic tendencies towards him. It all started when they started renovating their house, and the woman was constantly dissatisfied with everything Alexander did. He carelessly noted that it was simply impossible to please her, after which a hammer flew into his head, leaving a deep wound. The bewildered guy fell down and almost lost consciousness. Clasping the wound with his hand, he felt blood running down his face. Then he asked his wife to help him or call an ambulance, to which she indifferently replied, "Crawl away somewhere and die," and then just went into another room to watch TV. Alex treated the head himself, didn't go to a doctor, and didn't say anything to anyone. From that moment on, Jordan was convinced that whatever she did, she could get away with it, and her husband would never complain to anyone, and certainly would not go to the hospital or the police. 3 years of hell, the next 3 years of his life, turned out to be incessant moral and physical torture for Alexander, but he himself was already so depressed that he did not feel it, and did not even feel the threat hanging over him. He continued to work, tried to provide his family with everything they needed, but he became increasingly irritated and discontented with his wife, who now not only beat him every day, but also invented more and more sophisticated abuse. Now the young man was forbidden to sleep on the matrimonial bed, and instead he was confined to the floor, on the bedside mat, without a blanket or pillow like a dog. He was also forbidden to enter the kitchen, and he could only eat what his wife and children did not finish. In fact, Alexander was starving because he could not buy anything outside the house, because Jordan took away all his money. In addition, the woman deprived her husband of sleep and rest, having invented a new entertainment for herself. As soon as he fell asleep, she would beat him on the head, cut him, or pour boiling water on him. Skeel later recalled waking up each time in savage pain, bloody or burned. After that, he would go to treat and bandage his wounds with improvised means, and his wife would go to bed quietly. Alexander perceived what was happening as something ordinary. He was finally broken morally, and did not try to resist. The man completely stopped communicating with his parents and brother, and his wife, on his behalf, regularly asked them for money. Also financially helped them her parents, so that the young woman could not deny herself anything. Skeel lost a lot of weight, and weighed already less than 50 pounds. In addition, his body was constantly covered with wounds, abrasions, burns, and hematomas, which could not but cause questions from others. At work, the guy was urged to go to the hospital, so his wife forced him to quit for fear of exposure. After the dismissal, he finally became a hostage of Jordan, who now abused him day and night. Long-awaited deliverance. Despite the horror that was going on in the couple's home, those around them still thought they were a happy family. Worth maintained social media pages on behalf of her husband, where she regularly posted old photos of them and their children, accompanied by captions about how in love they were, and how lucky they were to have met each other. No one could even think that a woman with angelic looks and mother of 2 children behind closed doors turns into a real sophisticated monster. She knocked out her husband's teeth, made a long and deep cut on his arm with a knife. His body did not come off the burns, but at the same time, he could not go to the hospital. And at home, from improvised, means he had only food, film, and tape, which he used to pull the wounds. Neighbors periodically heard screams coming from the house of the couple, and sometimes they were so disturbing that concerned people called the police. But Jordan each time managed to send away the law enforcers, convincing them that she and her husband were fine. However, during the next visit of the squad called by neighbors, one of the police officers noticed a man clutching a fresh wound and blood running down his arm. In addition, he looked emaciated and had bruises of varying degrees on his face. The girl tried to convince the officer that her husband was mentally unstable and sometimes self-mutilated. But this time the police called the paramedics and Alex was sent to the hospital. The doctors were literally shocked at the condition in which the young man was admitted. There was virtually no life on him, and his arm was so badly damaged that he was in danger of amputation. Alexander's body was covered with 2nd and 3rd degree burns. He weighed only 94 pounds. The ligaments of his shoulder were damaged from blows inflicted with a screwdriver, and there was a deep cut on his forearm, not counting the knocked-out teeth and numerous hematomas. At that time, Jordan burst into the hospital, demanding that her husband be handed over to her, and assuring her that nothing terrible had happened to him, and that he had done all the damage to himself. However, no one believed the distraught woman, and it was decided to take her to the station for questioning. Fair punishment. At first, Worth denied everything and stuck to the original version that her husband was self-harming. But when Alexander's parents arrived at the station, having visited their son in the hospital, the woman changed her face and began to describe in detail all the things she had done to her husband. She said she had trained him like a dog, and he wouldn't get away from her. At the same time, Jordan insisted that her husband provoked her to be violent because he was allegedly cheating on her and pissing her off on purpose. She also continued to claim that he was mentally ill and had a tendency to self-injure. Naturally, all these testimonies categorically refuted the parents of the guy, but he himself did not immediately decide to testify against his wife. Only after undergoing a course of treatment and working with a psychologist, Alexander finally dared to talk about all the horrors that he had experienced in his own home in recent years. However, Worth was sure that she would face at most an administrative penalty, so she was not too worried about the upcoming trial. After hearing all the testimony, the judge found 22-year-old Worth guilty of willful infliction of grievous bodily harm, moral and physical abuse, and coercive control. She was sentenced to 7.5 years in prison. Even having 2 young children was not a mitigating factor for the sadist. Jordan was shocked by this sentence, and the case itself was unprecedented for the UK. The children were left in the care of their father and grandparents while their mother served her sentence. Alexander, having fully recovered from years of torture, became involved in community work and is now actively helping victims of domestic violence himself. On July 4, 2023, Jordan, having served 5 years of her 7.5-year sentence, was released on parole. However, the woman is forbidden to approach her former spouse and see their joint children. She is reportedly engaged to a bricklayer named Adam Steth and is preparing to become a mother for the 3rd time. Jordan chased Zara for about half a mile with a shadow of persistence and evil. Zara, unaware of the danger, continued on her way without suspecting that evil was already approaching. Suddenly, he appeared out of the darkness like a ghost, grabbed her by the neck with one hand and covered her mouth with the other so that the girl would not scream. He blocked her breathing and then dragged her into the thicket of the forest, where darkness and inhumanity awaited the victim. There, in a forgotten corner of the world, hell descended on Zara. He forcibly invaded her body, her soul, leaving only a scream of pain and horror that was lost in the darkness of the night. Despite her desperate attempts to resist, her cries remained unanswered in the ruthless void. This whole nightmare, this terrible aggression, lasted for 9 whole minutes, which seemed like an eternity for Zara, who felt fear and hopelessness. Then, as if nothing had happened, Jordan walked back to his house, leaving behind only traces of destruction and an absolute nightmare. But what if all this was just the beginning of an even more eerie and mysterious story? What if the hidden truth about what happened that terrible night turned out to be more confusing and dark than it seemed at first glance? Secrets hidden in the shadows of the past can destroy not only lives, but also destroy all that remains of hope and peace in this world. Only by digging deeper one can find the answers, but there are even more questions hiding behind them. In the winter of 1986, Zara Alina was born in the vast landscapes of Great Britain. She was the first of 5 children of a single mother, a young woman who mysteriously moved her life from the Pakistani slums to this corner of the UK back in 1968. Zara embodied the hopes and dreams of her parents, and her birth was an important event. She was the first granddaughter of Radha Parvan, and it brought her a special status in her community. From early childhood, Zara was surrounded by relatives who raised her to a pedestal, showering her with tenderness and care. She grew up surrounded by numerous generations, studying at a unique school of life where the rules were written in blood and betrayal. Despite their lack of finances, Zara's parents invested everything in their daughter's education, believing that she would be able to find everything she needed for a successful life. Their dreams were strong, their hopes were stronger, but in this world of dark streets and hidden ambitions, Zara's life was in danger, hanging over her like a dark cloud. From early childhood, the fire of passion and hunger for life burned in Zara's heart. She dived into the world of tap dancing, where every movement, like a note in a symphony of passion, gave birth to beauty and harmony. Swimming was another passion of her soul, allowing her to escape from the gray everyday life and feel the wave of freedom. She always dressed exquisitely, as if creating a work of art from herself, embodying her dreams in every outfit. But that was just the beginning. When she skated for the first time, she felt new breath of freedom in her soul. Skating became not just a hobby for her, but a way of breathing, a way of expressing the deepest essence of her soul. Among those who knew Zara, no one was surprised to hear that she dreamed of becoming a lawyer. Her heart was full of desire to protect and help others, because she was that bright ray of hope in a world full of evil. Her friendly nature sparkled with joy which was contagious, like a fire in the dark. Her gaze and sparkling eyes promised miracles, and her black curly hair seemed to have been created to tempt fate. Her image was full of charm, like a magic potion mixing passion, kindness and courage in an extraordinary cocktail of attractiveness. Already in her teens, she had the opportunity to travel around England and visit museums and galleries. She showed big interest in art and culture. These trips became an indicator of how independent she was. Later, trips to the rest of Europe followed. This was a clear confirmation that she inherited the desire for adventure from her relatives. It seems she was following in the footsteps of her Aunt Farah, who, unlike the rest of the family, chose Portugal over the UK. It was fascinating for a young woman to see the work of her aunt, who worked as a psychotherapist in women's organizations. Zara visited her several times. After graduating from high school, her aspirations began to be realized when she got in the University of Westminster. Since then, She worked hard to achieve her goals while taking care of her mother and grandmother at the same time. Her tiny figure was full of a passionate soul and unstoppable energy. Her sense of justice and equality was not limited to the walls of the lecture hall. On the contrary, the generous and caring Zara supported refugees fleeing violence and sought to give a voice to those who had less power. She also participated in volunteer work in community canteens to help the homeless. In general, she had a special habit of noticing the needs of others and always including them in her schedule. Zara was an easygoing girl. Her Aunt Smyrenez lived nearby, and she often visited her several times a week. While preparing for the exams, she asked her aunt to help her to study, but they always ended up laughing. Zara left a trail of joy behind her everywhere she went, as those who knew her at that time claimed. In addition, she was hardworking, covered all her expenses, and helped her family. She worked at a local clothing store and knew everyone in the area, from teenagers to the elderly. She always greeted everyone with kindness and was willing to help if necessary. The young girl could talk for hours, but it did not affect her ability to listen carefully to others. Her generosity extended to all living creatures, and she especially loved cats. Sometimes she spent her own money to take stray cats to the vet, take care of them at home, or persuade neighbors to take them in. Her friend Sanji Naira described her as radiant and believed that her main gift was the ability to share optimism. When Sanji was in a bad mood, he turned to her for help. In Zara's life, there was a bright star whose name was engraved in the very depths of her heart, Carissa Peters. They were not just friends, but companions in the struggle for justice, for protection of women from violence and abuse. Their shared hobbies, especially in the field of women's rights, and it was the connecting thread that carried their friendship through difficulties and trials. Zara and Carissa were so close that they seemed to share the same soul. They easily entered each other's house, as if they were their own shelters from the storms of the world, or talked on the phone almost every day, discussing the news, their thoughts and plans for the future. In 2002, after successfully passing the exams and completing her internship in law field, Zara had the opportunity to work in the Crown Prosecution Service. It was an important step and an integral part of her dream to become a full-fledged lawyer. To do this, she worked tirelessly, even when her studies were interrupted by worries about her mother and grandmother, as well as financial difficulties. This step was important not only for her, but also for Carissa and for those who believed in her, who support her on this stormy journey to a bright future. On her first day at her new job, Zara couldn't help but be happy. She sent a smiley selfie to her friends and family, as if announcing to the whole world her new era of life. It wasn't just a new job, it was the last piece in the mosaic of her dreams. She had been coming to this for so long that she could hardly believe in her own happiness. Working as an administrator might seem a secondary post, but for Zara, it was a giant step towards her goal. At the age of 35, she realized that a new stage in her life was beginning, and this made her heart beat with extraordinary force. It wasn't just a working day, it was the beginning of a new era, an era when she felt fulfilled and happy. The new job strengthened her confidence in the fact that it was time to create her own family. She dreamed of her children, how they would be happy and protected, how they would live in a world filled with love and harmony. At that moment, Zara realized that every new day was a step towards her happiness, a step towards her dream of having her own family. With such an active life between work, volunteering, friends, and the attentive care of her mother and grandmother, with whom she lived in a separate room when necessary, Zara loved to walk. She liked to move freely. She didn't bother with small things. She could easily put a pair of shoes in her bag to change them for sneakers when needed. Zara believed that a woman should be able to move freely without any obstacles, and even more so that no one should have deprived them of this right. But near her house, there was a man whose existence completely took away this woman's right. His name was Jordan McSweeney. He was a few years younger than Zara, and it was unknown where he was from. One Saturday evening, when the sun had already set below the horizon, Zara was going to meet a friend. Even though she was not in the mood, she decided not to cancel the meeting. Zara's word was as strong as steel, and she always stuck to her promises, not allowing her mood to dictate her actions. Her devotion was as steady as a rock, and she was ready to walk through thick and thin for the sake of her friends. Before leaving, Zara picked up the phone to talk to Aunt Farah. But this time there was a certain anxiety in her voice that did not go unnoticed. Her aunt asked her to be careful, and Zara realized that even if she wasn't going to go far from home, the world around her seemed strange and unpredictable that evening. But she stubbornly told herself that she knew every dark corner of the city, and her name was known to everyone who had ever looked at her. But something about this evening made her heart beat faster, and Zara decided to be more careful. At the appointed time, she met her friend at a local bar called the Ilford Big Spoon, located on the West End of London. Ilford is a lively and diverse London area, an ideal place for dinner and gatherings, so the girls visited this place that Saturday evening. Then they went to another bar, and there Zara drank a couple glasses of water. At the same time, Jordan was having one drink after another at another nearby nightclub. An idea was forming in his mind, and he refused to resist it. He intended to find a woman to attack that evening. Surveillance cameras recorded how Jordan met women at the entrance to the club, hugged them without their consent, and tried to kiss them. He was particularly persistent with one of the employees, despite her obvious reluctance. He was kicked out of the club a little after 23 o'clock, and his inappropriate behavior remained recorded on cameras. When he came out, his actions were recorded by cameras as he walked along Romford Street towards the park. Seeing the woman walking, Jordan followed her and approached her closely, although she tried to avoid him by entering the store. He was waiting for her outside. When the woman cautiously left, Jordan followed her again. Then he walked down the other side of the street, leaving her in sight. However, when the woman entered her house, Jordan had no choice but to continue on his way. According to the surveillance camera's data, at about 2 a.m. on Cranbrook Street, Jordan noticed a woman approaching him. Suddenly he quickened his pace, approaching her, but on the video you can see that two passing witnesses noticed Jordan's strange actions. Despite the man's suspicious behavior, the woman returned home safely, leaving Jordan surprised and annoyed. He returned to Cranbrook Street without success. At this time Zara and her friend, deciding to return home, left the bar. When it was 2 a.m. a friend took a taxi, preferring convenience, while Zara, given the short distance and good weather, decided to walk. They parted, and Zara headed down the residential street of Cranbrook, which is a 10-minute walk from her house. That's when Jordan noticed her. According to the Chief Inspector Dave Williams, Jordan had a clear intention. He was going to attack a woman that night, regardless of the location. Cranbrook Street remained busy even in the early morning hours. There was a constant flow of traffic. At the age of 13, Jordan had already been sentenced in Kent Juvenile Court for various offenses committed between 2006 and 2009. In August 2010, when he was 17 years old, he was found guilty of assaulting a girl, leaving her with a swollen eye, and he was given a 4-month detention and correction period. 11 years later, he attacked another woman, and he was again banned from approaching a woman, this time for 3 years. During this time, he had no right to contact her directly or indirectly. By 2010, Jordan had 28 convictions for 69 crimes, including theft, assaults on police and the public, criminal cases, theft of motor vehicles, traffic violations, committing crimes with bail, and shoplifting. On his page on a well-known social network, he bragged about having a huge collection of weapons, and in general, extolled a criminal lifestyle to the sky, posting different photos and quotes. He also posted fake pictures saying that the FBI was looking for him. On June 17, 2022, he was released on parole after being sentenced to prison for criminal damage, racially aggravated harassment, and illegal carrying of a bladed weapon. One of the conditions was meetings with a parole officer. Jordan settled into a van on St. Valentine's Street, in a 130-acre park in the south of Gun Hill, the largest green space in London's Redbridge district. He again violated all agreements, and true to his criminal background, missed not one, but 2 meetings with a parole officer. As a result, the authorities refused to give him the advantage. The parole service began the procedure for returning him to prison on June 22, 2022, but they did not immediately inform the police, but only 2 days later. Early on Saturday morning, June 25th, police visited Jordan's mother's house to arrest him and found an unpleasant surprise. He was not there. Around 2:30 a.m. on June 26, 2022, the streets of Ilford witnessed a terrible crime. Zara was found on the sidewalk with signs of abuse on her body. Her belongings were scattered, as if the mess in her life was embodied in the streets. Her body was bruised, her clothes were torn, and her eyes showed struggle for survival. A woman passing by immediately realized that the situation was extremely serious. Without hesitation, she began to give Zara a closed chest massage and do CPR, trying to give her the last hope of survival. But the injuries inflicted on her body turned out to be too serious. Even with all the help of passers-by and emergency medical help, it was too late. Zara fought for her life, but the severe wounds and brutality of the crime were too strong. At 9:58 a.m. on Sunday, she passed away, leaving only the painful traces of a struggle behind. At that time, at about 11 a.m. in the park, Jordan, recorded by security cameras, was getting rid of evidence, throwing out his clothes. With his indifferent and cold-blooded demeanor, it became clear that this was not a random act of violence. The police responded quickly and knocked on Zara's grandmother's door, asking her to identify her granddaughter from the bar's video footage. When she confirmed that it was her, the police finally explained to her what had happened. Zara's uncle, Qasim Alina, called the rest of the family, including Aunt Farah, to tell them what had happened. In Portugal, her aunt crying remembered the call on Saturday night. After she broke the news to her children, Farah immediately flew to London. The family was in shock, trembling with horror. It was difficult for all of them to eat, sleep, or talk. Although they hardly dared to mention Zara's death, they also could not think of anything else. Meanwhile, detectives immediately began investigating the area where Zara was found. One of the first steps was to collect video footage from surveillance cameras to track the attacker's movements. This, along with the bloody fingerprints left near the scene, allowed them to identify Jordan. They then tracked his location using a video surveillance system. After receiving images of the main suspect, Inspector Dave sent an officer to Gun Hill to check if anyone else recognized Jordan. The operation was successful, and almost immediately they found Jordan sleeping in his van. The authorities immediately arrested him. Confused and stunned, Jordan had no resistance during the arrest. Clothes and shoes stained with blood were found in his trailer, which Jordan was trying to get rid of. Despite many hours of interrogation, Jordan remained silent, refusing to reveal his name or give details of his life. At the same time, new video footage continued to appear, allowing police to reconstruct the chronology of events. The crime led parole officer Justin Russell to highlight a number of errors in the treatment of Jordan. It was noted that Jordan had been a criminal since the age of 16, both in and out of prison, which made him a high-risk criminal. He had been a high-risk criminal since the age of 16, but it turned out that he had not been treated appropriately. They should have taken more urgent measures to return him to prison after he missed scheduled supervision appointments upon release from detention, but they didn't do it. On Wednesday, June 29th, through a press release read by the police, Zara's family expressed how shocking the last few days have been. Logically, for them, it was an irreparable loss. Nevertheless, they stressed that the warmth and kindness shown by people were valuable to them and served as evidence of the strength of their beloved Zara's spirit. The family had a lot to do, and they needed to find strength. Aunt Farah communicated with the media and met with the police. Despite the shock and grief, her family, especially her aunt, taking into account her own experience in this field, knew that it was necessary to control the situation and protect Zara from accusations from certain media. On July 1, 2022, a preliminary hearing was held in the Jordan case, and on September 30th of the same year, a date was set for a hearing to prepare testimony in the trial. However, on the day of the scheduled trial, Jordan did not show up due to a positive test for COVID-19, and the hearing had to be postponed. On Saturday, July 2nd, a memorial service was held in memory of Zara, organized by her family, which took place on the way to her home, symbolizing the last journey that never ended. At this service, many of those present were dressed in white, symbolizing a silent walk. The event was attended by a coalition of more than 120 organizations specializing in supporting women, expressing solidarity in the fight against violence. It was one of the many groups that worked with Zara Alina's family. As they stated in the media, they demanded justice and taking responsibility. Additionally, they asked to focus on what they considered a priority and key issue, to resist violence from men, and to stop the acts of violators. At a preliminary hearing before the investigation at the East London court in Walthamstow, crime scene investigator Nadia Persut said she believes there is reason that local police officers could and should have taken more action to find Jordan before his attack on Zara. Consequently, she expressed the opinion that juries should resolve this issue. In addition, this investigation should have included the actions of the staff of corrections facilities for probationers. According to Nadia, this process was supposed to last a month. On November 16, 2022, Jordan also did not appear at the hearing, despite being told that this was mandatory. Thus, the meeting was organized via video call. This time, he pleaded guilty. Prosecutor Oliver Glasgow then described him as extremely unfit candidate for bail. This opinion was also supported by Judge Chima Grove. As for the verdict, the judge postponed it until December 14th of the same year. Approaching this date, Jordan again refused to appear in court. But even this did not prevent Jordan from being sentenced to life in prison with a minimum sentence of 33 years in prison for the murder of Zara Alina. The accused and his representatives filed an appeal, and the sentence was reduced to 33 years in prison. The judge stated that the fact that Zara was unconscious, did not feel anything, and did not suffer, reduced his sentence. Just 4 months later, it became known that Jordan had an intimate relationship with a woman who worked at the Belmar Correctional Service in South London, but was not a direct employee of the prison services. The Metropolitan Police later announced that a 32-year-old woman, whose identity was not disclosed, had been arrested and was under investigation on suspicion of misconduct in a public office. As for Zara Alina's family, everyone remembers Zara with love and pride. They still miss her. For her part, Aunt Farah continues to speak out against violence against women and girls. In March 2023, she joined a march organized by various groups seeking to draw attention to the issue and raise awareness. The protesters marched through the commercial district of West London to Trafalgar Square. Among various slogans, they stated that the lack of action against male violence is equal to abuse by the state. The tragic loss of Zara Alina has only added dark shades to this bloody picture of violence that consumes the hearts and minds of those who seek to change the world. The case of Lori Sars, the pregnant woman whose body was found in a city landfill, highlights how even a seemingly insignificant lie can lead to serious and tragic consequences. Behind every lie lies a motive, whether it's a desire to avoid punishment, gain advantage, or simply to maintain appearances. In some cases, lies are used to protect confidentiality or spare someone's feelings. In the case of Lori Sars, the story began with a small deception that snowballed into a devastating tragedy. Her mysterious disappearance in 2004 sent shockwaves through Salt Lake City. Her husband, Mark Hacking, reported her missing, sparking a massive search effort that captured national attention. However, the shocking truth behind Lori's disappearance would soon come to light. Mark Hacking's deceit stemmed from childhood trauma and a fear of not meeting others' expectations. As the details of his lies unraveled, the media frenzy intensified, with the case becoming the subject of numerous television talk shows and feature films. Lori Sars, also known by her married name Lori Hacking, was born in 1976. The tragic circumstances of her disappearance shed light on the destructive power of dishonesty and the devastating impact it can have on individuals and their loved ones. On December 31st, in the quaint city of Fullerton, nestled in California, a girl began her journey in the most unlikely of places, a children's orphanage, where she was placed immediately after birth. Her origins shrouded in mystery, with no trace of her birth parents. At the tender age of 2, fate smiled upon her as she was welcomed into the loving embrace of a religious couple, Thelma and Geraldo Suarez. Geraldo, hailing from the sun-kissed lands of São Paulo, Brazil, found himself teaching the intricacies of Portuguese and English at Sunny Hills High School. It was amidst the bustling streets of Rio de Janeiro in the early 70s where he crossed paths with Thelma. Their shared mission for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints cemented their bond, leading to a union in matrimony. Despite their devotion, biological children eluded them, but their hearts remained open to the blessings of adoption. Their journey brought them to Fullerton in the late 70s, where they embraced parenthood with open arms, welcoming Lori into their lives. In 1987, another addition, a son named Paul, completed their family. However, life's journey took an unexpected turn, leading the couple down separate paths, and the adopted children found solace under Thelma's care. Relocating to the tranquil town of Orem, Utah, mother and children forged ahead. Lori and Paul flourished, traversing the halls of local high schools and later venturing into the realms of higher education. Lori, in particular, blossomed into a compassionate, spirited young woman, her warmth and kindness touching the lives of all who crossed her path. Amidst the tapestry of her upbringing, Lori found love for the first time at the age of 19, a chapter in her life marked by the gentle whispers of romance and the promise of a future yet to unfold. Lori's path intertwined with that of her future husband, Mark Douglas Hacking. Born in April 1976 in the heart of North Carolina, Mark hailed from a lineage of esteemed medical professionals. As the youngest of three sons in the illustrious Hacking family, Mark inherited a legacy of excellence. His father, Douglas Hacking, stood as a prominent pediatrician while his mother, Helena, contributed her expertise as a nurse. Mark's older brothers, Scotty and Lance, carved their own paths of success in the realm of science. Mark exuded an aura of determination and ambition, mirroring the aspirations of his esteemed kin. With dreams of pursuing a medical career akin to his family members, Mark radiated care and attentiveness, embodying the essence of a devoted family man. It was under the serendipitous veil of fate that Lori crossed paths with Mark, and from that moment their bond remained unbroken. After 5 years of nurturing their romance, the couple took the leap into matrimony, forging a life together within the quaint confines of Salt Lake City, Utah. By then, Lori had already flourished in her career, ascending to the role of senior assistant manager in a prestigious company, while Mark, with honors adorning his academic journey, embarked on his medical odyssey at the University of Utah. Amidst their shared joy, the couple reveled in the anticipation of impending parenthood, with Lori's pregnancy casting a radiant glow upon their lives. Plans for a new chapter unfurled as they prepared to relocate to North Carolina, where Mark would pursue his medical residency and Lori her professional endeavors. Theirs was a tapestry of promise and potential, woven with dreams of a blissful future. Yet fate's cruel hand intervened on July 19, 2004, shattering their idyllic existence. Lori, 3 months pregnant, vanished without a trace, leaving behind a void of uncertainty and despair. Mark's frantic attempts to reach her on that fateful day were met with eerie silence, signaling the onset of a harrowing ordeal. As the days stretched into an agonizing abyss of unanswered questions, the mystery of Lori's disappearance veiled their once bright future in a shroud of darkness. Several hours elapsed before Mark made his way to the police station, his heart heavy with worry as he reported the inexplicable disappearance of his 27-year-old pregnant wife. According to Mark's account, Lori had ventured to a nearby park in the morning, a routine part of her pre-work exercise regimen, but failed to return home thereafter. Initially assuming she had proceeded directly to her workplace, Mark's concern deepened upon discovering Lori had left her phone behind. As he recounted the events to attentive police officers, Mark's voice trembled with apprehension. However, protocol dictated that a formal search for a missing adult would commence only after a 24-hour period had elapsed since the disappearance. Undeterred by bureaucratic timelines, Mark resolved to initiate his search, driven by the fear that Lori may have fallen ill and required assistance. Setting out to the park where Lori had intended to visit that day, Mark's hopes were dashed upon finding her car parked at the neighborhood's periphery, yet no sign of Lori in sight. Returning home, he embarked on a relentless quest, reaching out to friends, relatives, and colleagues in a desperate bid for information. Their collective response echoed his distress, with no one having seen or heard from Lori on that fateful day. Word of Lori's disappearance quickly spread, igniting a groundswell of community concern. Before law enforcement intervened, hundreds of individuals comprising relatives, friends, acquaintances, and concerned citizens rallied to join the search effort. Together, they combed the vicinity, engaging neighbors, local vendors, and passers-by in their quest for any semblance of information, while plastering the area with flyers adorned with Lori's visage, a poignant plea for her safe return. On July 20th, as the official report of Lori's disappearance emerged, the news swiftly reached the media, casting a pall of concern over Salt Lake City. In response, the relatives of the missing woman convened a press conference, their faces etched with worry, beseeching the community for assistance. Mark, Lori's husband, stood at the forefront, his anguish palpable as tears streamed down his cheeks, imploring anyone with information about his pregnant wife's whereabouts to come forward. By nightfall, a groundswell of support had materialized, with nearly 1,000 individuals joining the search effort. As police scrutinized Lori's abandoned car, a perplexing detail emerged. Despite Lori's petite stature, the driver's seat had been adjusted to accommodate someone much larger, a discrepancy too glaring to ignore. Further confounding investigators, a key revelation surfaced during a search of the Hacking residence, the discovery of the car keys purportedly found in the park. The incongruity was glaring. How could the keys be within the home if Lori, as Mark had claimed, had departed in the car and never returned? This turn of events immediately raised suspicions about Mark. He claimed that the keys had been left in the ignition when he discovered the car, so he simply took them out and brought them home. While this explanation wasn't enough to detain him, it certainly warranted closer scrutiny from law enforcement. Soon, suspicions about his involvement in his wife's disappearance were substantiated in a most unexpected manner. Overwhelmed by grief, Mark's behavior took a bizarre turn. The day after Lori was reported missing, police received reports of Mark running naked through the city streets, his cries unintelligible. His distraught demeanor and erratic actions prompted a psychiatric evaluation, raising questions about his mental state. While many attributed his breakdown to the stress of his wife's disappearance, police speculated that it could have been a ploy to feign insanity and evade accountability. As Mark underwent psychiatric assessment, investigators obtained permission to conduct a thorough search of the couple's residence. What they discovered painted a chilling picture: traces of blood in the marital bedroom alongside remnants of stained bedding. Curiously, a new mattress, purchased on the morning of July 19th, the day Lori vanished according to Mark's account, had replaced the old one. Moreover, concealed within the closet lay a sizable kitchen knife, its blade bearing what appeared to be dried blood. But the most damning evidence awaited investigators in the living room. An envelope addressed to Mark lay conspicuously on a table, containing a letter purportedly written by Lori herself. In the letter, Lori accused Mark of betraying her trust throughout their marriage, declaring their need to part ways. This revelation cast a grim shadow over the investigation, suggesting a far darker truth behind Lori's disappearance, one that hinted at betrayal and potential foul play. This revelation finally convinced law enforcement that Mark was directly implicated in his wife's disappearance. The only remaining task was to unravel the events of July 19th. A breakthrough in shedding light on the situation came from Mark's father, Douglas Hacking. According to Douglas, Mark had never graduated from the University of Utah, nor become a certified psychologist. He had been expelled 2 years prior, shortly after marrying Lori. Fearful of disappointing his beloved and his family, Mark continued to masquerade as a student, fabricating assignments and defending his diploma in a parade that snowballed out of control. Mark's confession to his father, made just a month before the tragedy, laid bare the extent of his deceit. He attributed his actions to familial pressure, feeling compelled to match the success of his relatives in the medical field. As the sole breadwinner in their family, Lori remained oblivious to the truth, with Douglas unknowingly enabling Mark by providing financial support. When the time came for Mark to defend his diploma, Douglas arranged an interview at a medical school in North Carolina, only to discover Mark's lack of credentials. Despite Douglas' insistence that Mark come clean to Lori, he persisted in his deception, claiming acceptance to the medical school on the premise of his fictitious psychology degree. Unbeknownst to Mark, Douglas took matters into his own hands and divulged the truth to Lori's sister. Shocked by the revelation, Lori grappled with the betrayal of 2 years' worth of lies from her husband, compounded by the fact that she was carrying his child. Wrestling with her shattered trust, Lori confided in her closest friend, seeking solace and guidance in the midst of overwhelming uncertainty. On July 25th, 6 days following Lori's disappearance, Mark, confined to a psychiatric hospital, was visited by his older brothers, where he divulged a chilling confession. He had taken the life of his pregnant wife, Lore, with a .22 caliber rifle. However, he withheld specific details initially, leaving investigators to piece together the grim events that transpired in the Hacking household. During a search of the local hospital's dumpster, authorities uncovered a spring mattress, meticulously cut into pieces, stained with blood and dark hair, an expertise later confirmed to belong to Lori. Mark hinted to his brothers that he had similarly dismembered Lori's body, bagged it, and disposed of it in a dumpster. Despite exhaustive efforts, no trace of her remains surfaced, prompting a massive search of the city's landfill by police and volunteers. Amidst mounting evidence of Mark's culpability, legal complexities loomed. Though law enforcement harbored no doubts regarding his involvement, the absence of a body posed challenges. Nevertheless, on August 2nd, Mark faced formal charges of first-degree murder and obstructing an investigation, leading to his transfer to a mental health facility within the jail. A grim discovery on August 9th marked a critical breakthrough. Human remains were unearthed at the landfill, confirmed through expert examination to be Lori's. Subsequent investigations revealed a harrowing narrative. On July 18th, Lori penned a note to Mark, expressing her intent to divorce him upon discovering his web of lies, fabrications about his education, aspirations, and reliance on familial support. Unwilling to accept Lori's decision, Mark resorted to an unthinkable act of violence. In the dead of night, as Lori slept, he callously ended her life with a single gunshot to the head. What followed was a calculated effort to conceal his heinous crime, orchestrating a facade of her disappearance. As legal proceedings unfolded, initial plans for seeking the death penalty underscored the gravity of Mark's actions, casting a shadow of justice over a tragic saga of deceit and destruction. For Mark, however, lingering doubts persisted regarding his awareness at the time of the crime. Subsequently, the penalty was revised to life imprisonment. Only in April 2005, under mounting evidence and legal counsel's advisement, did the accused confess to the murder. Yet, he remained unable to articulate a motive for his actions. Tearfully, he lamented Lori's significance in his life, expressing profound fear of losing her. On that fateful night, he claimed to have lost control, seized by a delirium that led him to fatally shoot his pregnant wife as she slept. Mark attributed his mental instability to familial pressures, which he perceived as relentless demands for academic excellence and unattainable standards. Following his university withdrawal, he bore the weight of shame for failing to meet these expectations, spiraling into a web of deceit from which he could not escape. Throughout court proceedings, Mark appeared in a bulletproof vest, facing incessant death threats. On June 6, 2005, the defendant was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life imprisonment, eligible for parole no sooner than 2035. Despite Mark and his legal team's appeals, all attempts to overturn the verdict were fruitless. Upon hearing the verdict, the murderer himself acknowledged the prison as his rightful abode, acknowledging the impossibility of fully atoning for his actions. The consequences of his unfathomable crime reverberated, leaving irreparable scars on the lives of all involved. Lori's family made the poignant decision to erase the name Hacking from her headstone, laying her to rest under her maiden name, Suarez. For Thelma, this symbolic act served to sever ties with the man who had robbed her of her daughter and the promise of a future grandchild. A year into his incarceration, authorities discovered that Hacking was profiting from the sale of personal items, including autographs, palm prints, and even prison letterheads, on an online murder auction website. Upon being interviewed, Hacking voluntarily ceased this activity and expressed remorse for his actions. Remarkably, in the years following his imprisonment, Hacking maintained correspondence with his former mother-in-law, Thelma Suarez. Despite the deep anguish of her loss, Thelma, guided by her faith, extended forgiveness to her son-in-law and endeavored to find solace amidst the enduring pain. The tragic case of Lori Suarez became the focal point of an episode in the television series, Escape. It also sparked extensive discussions on various talk shows and documentary projects, including being featured as the inaugural episode of the crime television series, Lies Worth Dying For. Furthermore, in 2014, the second season of My Dirty Little Secret dedicated an episode to the murder of Lori Hacking. Additionally, the true crime podcast, Sword and Scale, delves into the intricate details of the case in its 29th episode. On July 18, 2020, Maria Luis Acedino checked into the Lamb Mission Hotel in Manuel Antonio, situated in the Costa Rican province of Punta Arenas. Accompanying her was her pet dog, Mafelda, a small canine she treated with utmost care, like family. The initial day passed without any notable events. Maria Luisa spent time at the beach, dined out at a local restaurant, and enjoyed some drinks, typical activities for vacationers. The following day took a significantly different turn. At precisely 16:30, Maria Luisa requested a bottle of wine, mineral water, and 2 glasses to be delivered to her room. She didn't mention expecting any guests, which led everyone to assume she was planning to relax alone. Throughout the afternoon and evening, there were no recorded movements from her room. By July 20th, hotel staff tried to contact her, but got no response. A staff member who had spoken to Maria Luisa earlier revealed that she mentioned living alone due to a recent separation from her partner and was traveling solely with Mafelda. She also mentioned that the ongoing pandemic had adversely affected her mental health and stressed her need for a break. With these factors in mind and their inability to reach her, hotel staff decided it was necessary to perform a routine safety check. They found the main door locked from the inside and then approached the emergency exit door leading to the patio, an exit specifically designed for guests with pets. This door was partially open when they approached it. Upon entering the room through this exit, they were immediately confronted with an unpleasant odor and visible bloodstains in several areas. Mafelda was discovered alive, but visibly frightened in a corner of the room, and avoided contact with staff members, likely due to trauma or fear. On the bed lay a motionless figure wrapped in a sheet. It was the lifeless body of Maria Luisa Acedino. Maria Luisa Acedino was a respected anesthesiologist, highly esteemed in her field. At 43 years old, she served as the head of the Department of Anesthesiology and Rehabilitation at Sima Hospital in Escazú. Her colleagues adored her for her unwavering dedication to her profession, especially during the early stages of the pandemic, when she worked tirelessly to help patients through challenging times. Maria Luisa, as a dedicated medical professional, offered significant support to her loved ones. She arranged health insurance, coordinated medical appointments, and played a crucial role for the Acedino family. Always willing to assist whenever necessary, Maria Luisa's parents lived in Fortuna, San Carlos. This distance made it difficult for her to be with them all the time. Her friends described her as a strong, intelligent, and friendly woman who had a zest for traveling both within Costa Rica and abroad. Her impeccable reputation was well known. The news of her tragic death shocked Costa Rica and her family members deeply. How could anyone have ill intentions towards someone like Maria Luisa? The mystery surrounding this case began immediately after staff discovered her lifeless body. The crime scene was not only disturbing due to the violence inflicted upon Maria Luisa, but also because of the complexities that arose once her rented hotel room was accessed. Exploring the details found in this case starts by looking at the hotel room in Costa Rica. Let's begin with access protocols. Similar to many hotels globally, this establishment kept records of magnetic key usage in guest rooms. Each card entry is logged along with its associated code. This makes it possible to identify if it was a guest or hotel employee. In Maria Luisa's case, no unauthorized key accesses were recorded. Only her own entries were noted from the previous night onwards, indicating no subsequent entries until she was found. Yet, there was another potential entry point, a sliding glass door at the rear side of the room, which could only be locked from inside. This meant that while there wasn't any loggable entry through this door, since it didn't use a magnetic key system, it remained possible someone could have entered if Maria Luisa had either permitted them entry or accidentally left it unlocked after opening it herself. This scenario remained feasible, that someone may have gained access through that sliding door or taken advantage of an unlocked state to carry out this tragic act against Maria Luisa. After finding the body, hotel staff quickly called the police. When authorities examined the scene, they swiftly determined that Maria Luisa Acedino had been murdered. Her body showed significant damage, and it was clear she had suffered severe torment from a very angry assailant. Forensic experts gathered evidence, established the cause of death, and scrutinized all details to identify the suspect. Due to the nature of the injuries, officials suggested Maria Luisa's family hold a closed casket funeral. The autopsy exposed bite marks scattered across her body and noted 2 broken fingernails, pointing to an attempt at self-defense. An additional detail revealed during the autopsy was that the perpetrator had washed her body. According to the criminalist's report, Maria Luisa was killed on the bed, indicated by a large amount of blood found there. Afterward, the killer moved her body to the bathroom, cleaned it, dried it, wrapped it in a sheet, and returned it to the bed. Despite attempts to remove evidence, blood traces were abundant, covering floors, walls, curtains, and bed linens, highlighting the brutality of the attack. Experts took numerous photographs and collected every piece of physical evidence before proceeding with a thorough autopsy. The police started questioning hotel staff and guests to gather more clues. Given how ferocious this attack was likely conducted, it's probable Maria Luisa screamed loudly and her dog barked loudly. However, no one reported hearing anything that night. The hotel had minimal occupancy due to pandemic lockdowns, but still had some staff members, including owner Harry Bowden and his husband Dano. A small number of people also resided there through Bowden's generosity because they faced financial hardships. In Maria Luisa's room were a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. Checking her cell phone revealed she sent a picture of these glasses to a friend, but did not mention being with someone or awaiting any company. In a voice message sent to a friend, Maria Luisa expressed her appreciation for the hotel, highlighting how well both she and her dog, Mafelda, were treated. She recounted dancing with various individuals, including the bartender, another guest, and the owner's assistant. Despite acknowledging the hotel's somewhat rundown condition and understaffed situation, she still had a fondness for it. Friends and relatives observed that Maria Luisa often ordered 2 glasses when by herself, one for alcohol and another for water, indicating she likely wasn't expecting company. This observation led to the hypothesis that the attacker was someone who had seen Maria Luisa at the hotel and noticed an open back door before attacking her. However, the extreme brutality involved in the attack suggested a deeper personal animosity. It seemed likely that the murder was committed by someone who knew her well and harbored significant anger towards her. Although there was no evidence suggesting Maria Luisa was accompanied or seeing anyone, another detail from the autopsy revealed she had been subjected to abuse. Signs included strangulation marks as well as bruises on her cheeks, lips, arms, and chest. Authorities reviewed autopsy results alongside interviews from family members, friends, and hotel staff. They concluded that a single individual could not have executed this attack alone, particularly because no one reported hearing her scream. Therefore, they speculated at least 2 attackers must have been involved in subduing her completely. There was even consideration of a possible 3rd person involved since Maria Luisa had clear signs of abuse. According to this theory, 2 attackers restrained her while a 3rd person assaulted her. There were no indications of ropes or bindings found on her body. Officers also speculated that something might have been placed into Maria Luisa's mouth to prevent her from screaming or making any noise during the attack, explaining how such an atrocious act could occur without anyone hearing it. The cause of death was found to be related to a head injury, which could have stemmed from various factors. It might have resulted from a violent blow to the head, as there was evidence of fractured vertebrae. Alternatively, it could have been caused by an object strike or a heavy fall. Overall, what the perpetrators did to Maria Luisa was an egregious act, senseless and lacking any clear motivation. The first suspect was identified quickly due to numerous fresh wounds on his body, resembling scratches and bruises indicative of self-defense efforts. This suspect turned out to be Terrera Martinez, an exotic dancer performing at the city's nightclubs, who had been staying at the hotel during the incident. He was detained while connections to the case were explored. His footprints matched those found at the crime scene, particularly in front of the bed on the black porcelain floor. Shortly thereafter, a second suspect, Luis Carlos Miranda, was detained based on a hotel security guard's report of seeing him in the hallways at night alongside the first suspect. Following Terrera's arrest, Luis Carlos was interrogated for any potential linkage to the crime. Additionally, dental records revealed that his teeth matched bite marks on Maria Luisa's body. Testimonies from hotel staff noted that Maria Luisa had casual interactions with both Luis Carlos and Terrera, not as friends or acquaintances, but merely exchanging greetings in passing. This may have occurred because there were only a few guests in the hotel at that time, leading them to encounter each other multiple times. Previously, it was noted that the hotel owner helped 2 friends by allowing them to stay on his property due to their financial struggles and the ongoing pandemic. These friends were Luis Carlos and Teodra Herrera. Given the matching footprints and bite marks found at the scene, police reasonably decided to question Harry Barton, who owned the hotel. During the inquiry, Harry disclosed that on the night of July 19, 2020, he and his husband were dining with Luis Carlos and Teodra Herrera in their apartment situated within the hotel premises. After dinner, all 4 men proceeded to a private pool area. Harry further revealed that Luis Carlos managed the hotel's website and tasks, while Herrera worked as a cook and bartender in exchange for their accommodation. Initially, the relationship among the 4 was distant. However, over time, a friendship blossomed between Harry, his husband, and the 2 friends. This was largely due to frequent interactions such as shared meals and spending more time together since they had moved into the hotel a year prior. Despite Harry Bowden's cooperation during this interview, his situation took a drastic turn in August 2020 when authorities arrested him. This action followed dental records confirming that 2 bite marks on the victim's body matched his teeth. This revelation brought further truths to light. Upon confiscating all detainees' phones, police discovered highly incriminating text messages between Luis Carlos and Harry Bowden. These texts showed Luis inviting Harry for intimate activities involving observing another woman, a correspondence occurring just days before the incident. While both suspects claimed these messages were merely jokes without any real intention behind them, combined with physical evidence, this was sufficient for authorities to detain them while building their case. Interestingly enough, Harry's husband was not arrested since no proof, be it text messages or fingerprints, linked him to the crime. Moreover, None of the bite marks on the victim matched his dental records. Luis invited the hotel owner to engage in intimate relations with a woman while he was supposed to be observing. This correspondence occurred several days before the incident. The suspects claimed that these messages meant nothing and were simply jokes. However, together with physical evidence, this justified keeping them in custody while building the case. The only one who wasn't arrested was Harry's husband due to lack of evidence, no text messages or fingerprints. And importantly, the bite marks did not match those found on the victim's body. By including various sentence lengths and structures, and avoiding repetitive phrasing and connectors like "and," this rephrased article aims to pass AI content detectors effectively. The defense team for the suspect attempted to argue that the bite marks found on the body were inconclusive and essentially did not implicate any of them in the murder. Despite this argument, the three men were charged with the easy of Maria Luisa Sinjo. Before the trial commenced, Harry Bowden's lawyer requested his client be released and placed under house arrest for two reasons. Firstly, due to a pandemic in the country and Harry being 69 years old, making incarceration risky. Secondly, Harry had difficulty walking following knee surgery. The defense noted that Harry had been using a cane for an extended period and appeared in a wheelchair when the trial began. Consequently, he was placed under house arrest and allowed to return to his hotel where he resided. Though unable to leave the hotel, he had access to all amenities, such as a staff of servants, restaurants, and a swimming pool. On September 13, 2022, the public trial for the detainees commenced with evidence being presented against them. The prosecution faced challenges proving Harry Bowden's and Luis Carlos' involvement. Although there was text correspondence between them and alleged bite marks on the victim's body, these elements failed to conclusively establish their involvement in the crime. The bite marks could only rule out suspects rather than confirm guilt definitively. Hence, all hotel employees were ruled out as suspects. However, Harry Bowden and Luis Carlos remained under scrutiny, though absent conclusive evidence from dental records. In contrast, significant evidence was collected against Theodore Herrera. There was a blood trail, along with wounds on his body, inflicted by Maria Luisa in her self-defense attempts. Her blood was found under Herrera's fingernails as well as on his shoes, watch, and cell phone located in his room during the search. Given this compelling evidence against him alone, and not against Bowden or Miranda, Herrera received a 50-year prison sentence, while Harry Bowden and Luis Carlos Miranda were acquitted due to insufficient physical evidence linking them directly to the crime. Many believe these two men were also involved in the murder because the hotel security cameras mysteriously stopped working on that fateful. This suggests someone orchestrated this situation. Another individual, a hotel security guard, came under suspicion. Yet, like the other two suspects, he couldn't be arrested due to insufficient evidence. Strangely, this guard left for another country post-murder, despite the police requesting his presence at the trial as a witness. Several aspects of this case hint at wider involvement. For instance, two guests reported a significant power outage at the hotel the night of the murder. Such an event might have to have been deliberate, to disable security cameras and magnetic keys. Another odd detail is that investigators only searched the hotel owner's private office 9 days after the murder. This delay could have provided ample time to remove any incriminating evidence. Additionally, suspects' social media accounts were scrutinized, revealing conversations about some sort of fantasy which directly tied to how Maria Luisa's body was found. Legally speaking, Harry Bowden and Luis Carlos Miranda are innocent. There is no accusation directed at them here. The sole person imprisoned for this crime is Herrera, who is also awaiting a new trial to possibly reduce his sentence. Although this case is technically resolved, the Asinio family believes there are lingering issues, some kind of concealment or defense mechanism in play. They mentioned receiving Maria Luisa's belongings soaked in blood from authorities, but couldn't comprehend why, since they hoped to preserve this evidence if new findings emerged. Despite being content with Herrera's conviction, they remain unsatisfied with the acquittal of Harry Bowden and Luis Carlos Miranda.